You might be surprised to learn that even the smallest, most mundane actions can have a massive impact on your overall success and happiness. This video exposes 100 daily habits that could be holding you back from reaching your full potential. Let's start with level. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an ordinary day. You brush your teeth, you glance at your phone, you postpone the message you meant to reply to. You eat whatever's closest. These decisions feel weightless, like air passing through a window, but slowly they solidify into routine. The meal you skip becomes the body you inherit. The word you don't say becomes the relationship you lose. The task you delay becomes the life you never start. Every little choice is a vote, not for the life you dream of, but for the one you quietly slip into. In ancient Pompeii, daily life was tracked not in grand sculptures or epic poems, but in traces. Clay pots left near the hearth, graffiti carved into alley walls, laundry pressed on stone slabs. The people didn't know history would remember them, not through declarations, but through repetition. Their small habits, the food they bought, the streets they walked, formed the architecture of their world. What they ignored mattered just as much as what they chose. And even today, the same quiet pattern remains. You become not what you wish for, but what you do repeatedly when no one is watching. The skipped steps, the half-meant words, the default settings, they shape your path. Imagine your future not as one big decision, but 100 quiet ones, layered like dust. The life you want isn't lost in some dramatic failure. It's deferred, one small moment at a time. Before your eyes fully adjust to the light, before your breath has even deepened, a cold rectangle of glass pulls you out of sleep. The moment your fingers reach for your phone, almost by muscle memory, the quiet sanctuary of the morning is pierced. That first flicker of blue light doesn't just brighten the room, it begins to carve into your mind. What you see next is rarely yours. A flood of updates, notifications, the echo of someone else's urgency, messages you didn't ask for, opinions you weren't ready to receive, a stranger's vacation, a colleague's promotion, a world already halfway through its day, before your own thoughts have even had time to take root. In ancient monasteries, morning silence was sacred. Monks would rise with the sun and sit in stillness, allowing their minds to settle before the first word was ever spoken. In Japan, Zen practitioners would begin with zazen, seated meditation, letting the breath gently guide their sense of time back to the body. These weren't acts of discipline alone, they were rituals of alignment, a way of re-entering the self slowly, like stepping into a river without a splash. Compare that to now, when the first thing many of us do is hand over our consciousness to a glowing feed. Even before the mind is fully awake, we begin reacting. A slight tension in the jaw, a spike of envy, a creeping anxiety we can't quite name. Your phone doesn't just offer information, it sets the emotional tone for your entire morning. Imagine instead, you wake, and for a few quiet minutes, nothing demands you. The room is still, the air unmoving. You can hear the soft rustle of the sheets, the low hum of a distant fan. There is no performance here, no comparisons, just a chance to meet yourself in that in-between space, neither asleep nor entirely awake, where your thoughts are still your own. This moment, brief as it may be, holds power, because once the day begins, the world will pull at you in every direction. Deadlines, messages, headlines, noise. But these first few minutes, they are yours. If you can learn to guard them gently, you may find that your days begin not in reaction, but in rhythm, not in anxiety, but in presence. And all it takes is waiting a little longer before reaching for the screen. Imagine yourself sitting at a kitchen table, half-finished tea cooling beside you. A friend asks how you're doing, and almost without thinking, you say it. I'm fine. The words slip out like muscle memory, practiced and polished. You don't pause to consider if they're true. They aren't. but the lie is quiet, efficient, familiar. Over time, this phrase becomes more than a response. It becomes a script, rehearsed until it buries whatever truth once lived beneath. For many, "I'm fine" is not a reflection of peace, but a signal of withdrawal, a subtle folding in of the self. It offers protection, yes, but at a quiet cost. Every time it's said in place of honesty, it trains the mind to treat vulnerability as danger. Sadness becomes something shameful. Fear becomes something weak. And slowly, the ability to name your own emotions begins to atrophy, not because you lack feeling, but because you've been taught not to look. Historically, the idea of emotional restraint has been admired. In many cultures, stoicism, both as a philosophy and a posture, was considered strength. Ancient Roman senators would mask grief with speeches. Soldiers returning from war were told to move on. Even today, in office hallways and quiet bedrooms, silence is often mistaken for resilience. But suppression is not serenity. It's merely paused expression. Emotions don't vanish. They redirect. Into the body, the habits, the tone of voice, into strained smiles and half-hearted laughter, into insomnia and forgotten hobbies. Saying, "I'm fine," too often builds a version of the self that is functional, agreeable, efficient, and lonely. Not catastrophically lonely, but subtly so. The kind of loneliness that lingers in the pause after a conversation, or in the sigh before sleep. A loneliness so practiced that it no longer feels like absence, only routine. And in this routine, the real self waits, quiet, patient, hoping one day someone will ask again, and you'll answer differently. Imagine yourself lying in bed, eyes closed, body still, but your mind quietly scrolling through a reel of conversations long past. Not dramatic arguments or decisive moments, just the small exchanges, pauses, tones, glances. A word you wish you'd phrased differently, a joke that didn't land, the silence that followed something you now suspect was a mistake. These mental replays feel like harmless reflection, but they rarely stay that way. Over time, they turn soft memory into sharpened critique. You relive not what happened, but what could have happened, if only you were better, calmer, kinder, quicker. The mind, trying to regain a sense of control, quietly starts editing history. You insert imagined thoughts into other people's heads. You narrate their likely disappointment, rehearse their unspoken judgment. Each loop reinforces the idea that you were wrong, not just in what you said, but in who you are. And still, the replay goes on. You don't even realize you're doing it sometimes. It happens while washing dishes, walking to the store, brushing your teeth. The conversation may be weeks old or years. There's no resolution, no finish line, just the same scene playing out again and again, each time with more guilt attached. It doesn't soothe. It doesn't prepare you for the future. It only erodes the self quietly, like water shaping stone, not with force, but with patience. And yet, there is something deeply human about it. This obsessive reflection is often mistaken for growth. But real growth doesn't need an endless court trial in your head. Real growth allows for silence, uncertainty, even forgetting. It makes space for the idea that maybe not every flaw must be traced, that maybe you were simply doing your best, that maybe the conversation is over now, and it's okay to let it stay that way. In the soft glow of your screen, you scroll. A still life of filtered vacations, tidy kitchens, glowing skin, and uninterrupted joy glides by. Faces shine with confidence. Rooms are spotless. Mornings begin with yoga and tea beside a sunlit window. And even sadness, when shown, is framed in eloquent captions and gentle lighting, crafted, packaged, and ready for quiet admiration. You know, logically, that these moments are curated. Yet the deeper you scroll, the more distant your own day feels. That half-washed mug on your desk, the unread messages, the stretch of silence between meals, your quiet doubts. This wasn't always the way. A century ago, comparison meant a neighbor's garden or a sibling's grades. It was local, limited, and grounded in real proximity. Today, it spans thousands of miles and millions of users, offering glimpses into lives you'll never fully see. And in the absence of context, your mind fills in the blanks, imagining seamless routines, effortless beauty, endless certainty. You compare your pause with their performance, your silence with their statement. But behind every photo lies cropping. Behind every story, a decision not to share the mess just out of frame. And no one posts the inner monologue, the spirals, the self-doubt, the ordinary fatigue of being human. The algorithm doesn't reward balance. It doesn't highlight laundry or indecision or the ache of a long afternoon. Yet those, too, are parts of life, parts of your life. You are not falling behind. You are simply seeing the polished echoes of others while standing inside your own raw, unfinished moment. Imagine yourself nodding again. A soft yes to one more favor. A quiet agreement to plans you didn't ask for. A subtle smile that hides hesitation. At first, it feels like kindness, like connection. But over time, your days begin to blur, not because you're overwhelmed, but because none of the time feels like it truly belongs to you. Each yes becomes a small surrender, not loud, not painful, just gradual. In the early 1800s, diary entries from household servants in Victorian England reveal a similar erosion. A maid might begin her day before sunrise and end after midnight, each hour promised to someone else. The word no rarely appeared in their letters, not out of discipline, but because refusal was never an option. Even leisure, when granted, followed rules. Silence, not resistance, defined their lives. Their compliance wasn't praised, it was assumed. Like them, you may start by wanting to be helpful. You may feel needed, even essential. But eventually, the boundary fades. You stop asking what you want and start measuring worth by how useful you are to others. The schedule fills with obligations, small and polite. But somewhere beneath the calendar is a quiet regret. For the hours you gave away too easily, for the voice you quieted in order to keep the peace. And still, it happens gently. One yes at a time. Not to anything disastrous, but to everything that isn't quite right. Until the shape of your life no longer reflects your own outline, but the requests of others etched into your time. Imagine that, not a dramatic collapse, but a steady disappearing. A kindness turned costume. A smile that learned to apologize before it ever disagreed. The alarm rings, not loudly, just enough to tug you toward wakefulness. You reach out, barely opening your eyes, and tap the snooze. 10 more minutes. A small delay. Harmless, it seems. But beneath that brief extension lies a quiet rehearsal. Of hesitation, of postponement, of saying not yet to the promises you made the night before. Imagine yourself as you were hours earlier, laying out clothes, setting goals, telling yourself that tomorrow would start differently. But morning comes softly, and with it, the weight of inertia. The bed is warm, the room still dim. There's no judgment in staying, only a subtle erosion of intent. Ancient philosophers often described willpower as a muscle, one that grows through repeated use. In early Stoic texts, mornings were seen as training grounds for the self, a test of whether the body served the mind or the other way around. Yet in the modern world, a single button lets you opt out. Delay becomes default. The rhythm of your morning, once decisive, now stutters in 10-minute loops. Outside, the day begins. Light filters through the curtains. Somewhere, birds mark the hour. But your consciousness floats between worlds, unsure whether it's time to begin. And this fog lingers. The delay doesn't just shift your schedule, it reshapes your mindset. You begin already behind, already bargaining with the clock. What if instead, you let the first ring be your cue? A soft bell reminding you that time is moving forward, with or without you, not as punishment, but as invitation. To enter the day with quiet resolve, to keep the promise you made to yourself, not with force, but with calm. One ring, one decision, one rhythm to hold. Imagine yourself stepping into a room at night. It's quiet, too quiet. Before you even take off your shoes, you reach for the remote, a podcast, a show, maybe background music. Not because you're excited to listen, but because silence feels like exposure. In the spaces where no one is speaking, no lyrics are looping, no narratives are unfolding, your own thoughts get louder. And often, they aren't pleasant. They're the half-formed questions, the lingering regrets, the self-judgments you've learned to sidestep during the day. So you fill the silence, not with intention, but with insulation. This habit of always having something playing is increasingly common, not just for entertainment, but for protection. You walk with earbuds in. You sleep with ambient noise. You cook with YouTube playing in the background. The goal isn't presence, it's escape. And over time, the absence of noise starts to feel like a threat, as if quiet means failure, or worse, awareness. Historically, silence was once a part of life's rhythm. Ancient monasteries embraced it. Farmers worked fields with only the sound of wind and tools. Letters were written slowly, in rooms where the loudest thing was the scratch of a pen. But today, silence is rare. We've been taught to treat it as a void, something unnatural, something that must be filled. Yet silence isn't empty. It holds clarity, reflection, and, if given time, truth. But reaching that truth is uncomfortable, because it means meeting yourself where distractions can't follow. It means hearing the things you've muted, the confusion, the guilt, the longing, the questions with no neat answers. Filling silence with noise doesn't make those things disappear. It only postpones the encounter. And while distraction can comfort, it cannot heal. Sooner or later, the volume lowers. The room goes still, and what's been waiting in the quiet begins to stir. Imagine yourself at a gathering, holding a glass, nodding politely, offering small smiles on cue. Someone asks how you've been, and without hesitation, the answer comes, "I'm fine." The words are automatic, polished by repetition. No one pauses to question them, not even you. But somewhere beneath that answer, beneath the smile and the steady tone, there's a quiet ache, one you've taught yourself to ignore so thoroughly that even when you're alone, it hides behind the habits you've built. Pretending to be okay doesn't just fool others. It begins to retrain your relationship with your own emotions. The mask you wear in public starts to follow you home. You catch yourself laughing at nothing in the mirror, or brushing off thoughts that try to tug your attention inward. You forget how to name the heaviness in your chest, or explain why certain moments suddenly feel unbearable. And slowly, your pain stops arriving as sadness or anger. It appears instead as exhaustion, irritability, numbness, an empty kind of okayness that looks acceptable from the outside but feels like absence from the inside. This kind of emotional detachment isn't always conscious. It often starts with good intentions, trying not to worry others, trying to stay strong, trying to move on. But over time, it becomes a default. You begin to anticipate what others want to hear, what you think they can handle. And so you perform wellness. You smile when you're hurting. You say the right things. You make sure the cracks don't show. But pain that is hidden is not healed. Left unacknowledged, it doesn't disappear. It simply waits. Waits for quiet moments, for shadows at bedtime, for silence on a long walk. It becomes something you sense but can't name, something that dulls joy and sharpens loneliness. And yet, the act of recognizing pain, softly, without shame, is a kind of return, a reconnection. Not a collapse, not a weakness, but a whispered reminder that even behind a practiced smile, your feelings still exist, and they are waiting, patiently, to be heard. You shift between tabs. A half-written email here, a paused video there, background music playing from somewhere you're no longer hearing. Notifications blink, each one tiny and urgent, and your fingers move before your thoughts catch up. A message reply, a quick scroll, a glance at the clock. Somewhere between the start of one task and the end of another, you lose track of what you were doing or why. Modern life rewards this kind of fractured rhythm. Juggling feels like progress. Responding fast feels like achievement. You tell yourself you're being efficient, handling it all at once. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Your brain, built for depth and flow, is constantly shifting gears, exhausting itself in the process. Each interruption is small, but the cost accumulates. You're busy, yes, but not fully present in any of it. A few decades ago, focus looked different. One letter written by hand, one conversation in a quiet room, one walk with nothing but the sound of footsteps and wind. Attention was whole, not scattered. And time moved differently when it was allowed to stretch, to settle, to hold its shape. Now, even rest is interrupted. Even leisure is layered with distraction. You might lie down, but you're still checking, still reacting, still caught in the hum of urgency. The body slows, but the mind keeps sprinting. You are doing so much, and yet, when it's all over, it's hard to remember what any of it felt like, because no moment was given your full self. And without presence, even the most productive days can pass like fog. Imagine yourself swallowing the feeling before it can surface. You smile politely, even when something twists inside. You tell yourself it's nothing, that it will pass, that it's better not to make a scene. So the moment ends quietly, but the feeling doesn't disappear. It lingers, sealed in some hidden corner of your body, unspoken, unprocessed, waiting. Throughout ancient Japan, emotional restraint was often seen as strength. In certain samurai diaries, there are entries describing deep grief over the death of a friend, written not in sorrowful language, but in descriptions of the weather or the shape of falling leaves. The emotion never vanished. It merely changed form, not erased, but encoded into other things. A metaphor, a gesture, a silence stretched too long. Today, the habit remains. You bury your anger beneath a helpful tone. You hide sadness under distraction. You bury fear beneath tasks and timelines. But what's buried does not vanish. Emotion behaves more like pressure in a sealed jar. It ferments. It changes shape, thickens, sharpens, and then, one ordinary day, it explodes. Not as sadness or rage you recognize, but as irritability, apathy, sudden tears, or exhaustion you can't explain. The mind is clever, but the body keeps score. What you repress, it remembers. What you hide, it stores. A comment too small to notice triggers a storm. A simple delay feels unbearable. And you find yourself confused, not by what you feel, but by how much you feel it, as if it came from somewhere else, but it didn't. It came from the cellar you've been filling. So imagine yourself again, not breaking down, but softening, letting just one feeling rise, naming it without flinching. That small act is not weakness, it's release. And slowly, the pressure lessens. The jar stays intact. The life becomes yours again. You scroll past one video, then another. The next is shorter, louder, brighter. It catches your attention for a second, then fades. You swipe again. Somewhere deep in the design of these rhythms is a quiet expectation that the next thing will feel better. That satisfaction lies just one click away. But the further you go, the less you notice what you're passing by. Imagine a world where nothing was new, a time before digital feeds, before trending pages and curated suggestions. People read the same books again and again, watched the same stars cross the same sky. Seasons returned in slow, familiar cycles, and that repetition wasn't seen as boring, but grounding. Predictability gave life its texture. Today, novelty is currency. New content, new trends, new purchases, new goals. The pace doesn't allow for presence. You sip your coffee, but you're already thinking of lunch. You reach a milestone, and you're already setting the next one. Each moment becomes a stepping stone to another, never a destination of its own. In psychological studies, this is sometimes called the hedonic treadmill, a state where your mind adapts quickly to anything pleasurable. demanding ever more stimulation to feel the same spark. But with each new hit of excitement, appreciation weakens. Stillness becomes uncomfortable. Familiarity feels like failure. And yet, life isn't always meant to dazzle. Some of its richest experiences arrive quietly. A soft morning light through the curtain. A long conversation with no agenda. The feeling of doing something not because it's new, but because it still matters. You don't have to reject novelty, but you can begin noticing the hunger for it. The way your fingers reach for your phone the moment silence settles. The way your thoughts skip ahead, unable to rest where they are. You can choose, gently, to stay, to see again, to let the familiar become vivid once more. Imagine yourself deep in a task. Emails, deadlines, errands. Hours pass. Your stomach grumbles faintly, but you wave it off. Maybe you'll eat later. Maybe a glass of water if you remember. It doesn't feel urgent, just unnecessary for now. But beneath that dismissal, something more subtle is happening. When you skip meals or go without water, it doesn't just affect your body, it shifts how your mind perceives the world. Irritability rises without a clear cause. Thoughts fragment. You find it harder to focus, to care, to respond. Small problems feel bigger. Fatigue arrives without warning, and quietly, the self you present to others, steady, alert, composed, starts to crack. It's not just physical neglect, it's emotional distortion. A body starved of basic needs sends signals that can be misread as personal failure or sudden sadness. But often, it's simply dehydration, or low blood sugar, or exhaustion pretending to be despair. In ancient times, this connection was understood. Greek physicians believed imbalance in the body shaped the temperament of the mind. Eastern traditions taught that nourishment was not just survival, it was alignment. Today, though, we often treat food and water as optional enhancements, not essential rhythms, not care, just fuel if we get around to it. But your nervous system doesn't wait for your schedule. It responds now, with fog, tension, or disconnection. Over time, this neglect can reshape your baseline, not only physically, but emotionally. You begin to feel distant from others, from joy, from your own reactions. And because the decline is gradual, it rarely feels like a crisis, just a growing sense that something's off, that you're tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. The truth is, caring for your body isn't self-indulgence. It's the first language of mental clarity, of emotional stability, of connection. Sometimes, the path back to yourself starts with a glass of water and something warm to eat. Imagine yourself finishing something you once thought you couldn't do. A project completed, a risk taken, a quiet boundary held. For a moment, there's a flicker of pride, something warm, earned, real. But almost immediately, it's swallowed by a shrug. You call it not a big deal. You joke that it was luck. You change the subject before anyone can offer genuine praise. The moment passes, and the brain, always listening, takes note. Success is uncomfortable. Achievement feels exposed. Visibility brings risk. Downplaying your wins doesn't feel harmful at first. It feels humble, modest, safe. You tell yourself you're avoiding arrogance, staying grounded. But what you're also doing, slowly, repeatedly, is disconnecting effort from reward. You mute the emotional feedback loop that makes progress feel good, that gives your nervous system a reason to keep going. Instead of momentum, you build hesitation. You stop looking forward to finishing things. You stop trusting that what you create has value. And over time, your motivation becomes fragile, easily disrupted, quietly discouraged. This pattern often starts in small moments, deflecting a compliment, avoiding the spotlight, brushing off a milestone as nothing. But like erosion, the effect builds. A brain that never gets to feel proud will stop reaching. A heart that's always told to quiet its joy will forget how to celebrate at all. And yet, acknowledgement doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't require applause or announcements. It can be a breath, a pause, a sentence whispered only to yourself. I did that. That was me. That mattered. These moments of quiet recognition don't make you arrogant. They make you whole. They teach your body that effort is worth it, that growth is real, that forward is possible. You don't have to shout your wins from rooftops, but don't erase them either. Let yourself feel them. Let them land. Let them stay. You post something, a photo, a thought, a quiet achievement, and then you wait. You don't mean to, but your eyes drift back to the screen again and again, scanning for signals. A like, a comment, a sign that someone sees you, approves of you, confirms you. In that moment, the response feels like reflection, as if other people's reactions are mirrors, showing you who you are, or who you're allowed to be. But the mirror is warped. It shows only fragments. Algorithms decide what's seen, what's rewarded. Approval becomes a currency, but a fickle one, disappearing as quickly as it arrives. You begin shaping yourself around what earns attention, subtly editing your truth to match what the world applauds. And slowly, without noticing, you start outsourcing your sense of self. This isn't new. Long before the internet, validation came through applause, approval, acceptance into circles, social, academic, familial. But today, it's more immediate, more relentless, more visible. Every interaction becomes a performance, every silence a threat. And when the approval doesn't come, or worse, when it's replaced by criticism, it doesn't just sting, it destabilizes. You wonder what's wrong with you, what part of yourself needs to be reshaped to win back their favor. You forget that rejection can be neutral, directional, even protective. You forget that your worth is not a consensus. Imagine living where your value is not in question, where your choices don't require permission to matter, where rejection doesn't erase you, it simply reroutes you, where you are not a collection of reactions, but something whole, even when unseen. Imagine yourself with a notebook open, a page half filled with intentions. The plan feels perfect in your mind, detailed, color-coded, thoughtful. You rearrange the list, reframe the timeline, adjust the vision. It feels like progress. You tell yourself you're building something, but the pen moves and your feet don't. The map expands, but no path is walked. And quietly, without pain, you stay exactly where you were. In the early 1900s, explorers preparing for Antarctic expeditions often spent months in detailed planning, calculating food rations, stitching custom boots, testing materials. But sometimes, the most prepared never left shore. Their journals end not with journeys, but with checklists. It wasn't fear or failure that stopped them. It was the seductive sense of motion that planning provided, like frost patterns on a window, intricate but unmoving. Today, the same trap wears a digital face, folders of resources, courses bookmarked, calendars filled with carefully chosen blocks of deep work. And yet the task, the real task, remains untouched. The mind rewards preparation. It offers clarity, structure, even joy. But that joy is hollow when nothing is built. You begin to confuse the feeling of readiness with the act of doing. It's not laziness, it's comfort. Planning feels safe, controlled, promising. Action, by contrast, is messy, imperfect, unpredictable. So you wait for the right moment, when the schedule is just right, when the mood aligns, when everything feels certain. But that moment drifts like fog. The plan expands, the outcome fades. So imagine yourself closing the notebook, picking the smallest step, not the perfect one. Let it be clumsy. Let it be now. Not because it's ready, but because you are. You sit still, but your mind is elsewhere, inside a story where you're stronger, funnier, more admired. The world there makes sense. The rules are clear. Conflicts resolve. Victories feel earned. And unlike your own life, no moment feels wasted. Just one more episode, one more level, one more dream where you don't have to be you. Fantasy, in its many forms, has always been a shelter. Ancient epics gave people gods to root for. Fairy tales softened the brutality of childhood. Even cave paintings hinted at imagined worlds, visions of something beyond the present. There is nothing wrong with the need to imagine, but slowly, without warning, comfort can turn into confinement. you begin to notice the contrast. The fiction glows, while your actual life feels gray. Tasks blur. Conversations flatten. Real emotions become dull echoes compared to the vivid highs of invented ones. And so, you return, again and again, not because you're lazy, but because that other place is easier to inhabit. Psychologists sometimes call this escapism maladaptive when it starts replacing effort with avoidance. But labels don't capture the full picture. Often, it's not just laziness, it's protection. From failure, from disappointment, from the exhausting unpredictability of real life. It's easier to win a game than mend a relationship. Easier to daydream a new version of yourself than to become one. And yet, even the most beautiful fantasy can become a cage if it's used to numb rather than inspire. Your real life remains, quietly waiting. The pile of dishes, the unread message, the thing you keep saying you'll start tomorrow. You don't need to give up your stories, your games, your dreams. But what if you also gave your real life the chance to become something worth escaping into? What if, gently, you began to treat it like a world worth building, one uncomfortable, imperfect moment at a time? Imagine yourself standing in a room full of open tabs, calendars, emails, unread notifications, half-finished lists. You're moving constantly, answering, reacting, planning. You feel accomplished at the end of the day even if you can't quite remember what you actually did. There's a comfort in the motion, a sense of purpose wrapped in momentum. But quietly, something else is happening. Busyness gives the appearance of meaning. You're active, in demand, always doing. But beneath the surface, your deeper intentions, the ideas that once stirred you, the quiet goals you've shelved, are gathering dust. You're checking boxes that lead nowhere, completing tasks that don't align. You're moving, but not arriving. Historically, this pattern is not new. In ancient Rome, the philosopher Seneca warned against being preoccupied with much, yet achieving little. In monasteries, time was divided with care, not to maximize output, but to make space for reflection. Today, though, we prize the filled calendar, the packed day. We answer busy as if it's proof of worth. But productivity without direction is like rowing in circles. You feel the strain, but you're not closer to anything meaningful. And over time, this kind of motion can hollow you out. You forget what matters to you. You lose the thread. There's no alarm for this kind of drift, just a creeping dullness, a sense that your days are full but strangely empty, that your life is running fast but going nowhere in particular. To pause, to ask why, can feel risky. It interrupts the rhythm. But sometimes, stillness is the only way to notice you've strayed. Because not all movement is progress, not all effort is alignment, and not all accomplishments are fulfillment. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is stop. Imagine sitting across from someone you care about. There's something you need to say, something real, something important, but the words catch in your throat. You tell yourself now isn't the right time. You tell yourself they won't understand, or it'll just make things worse. So you swallow it. You smile. You change the subject, and life moves on, at least on the surface. But inside, a quiet fracture forms, not just between you and them, but between you and yourself. Avoiding hard conversations may keep the peace in the moment, but it comes at a cost. Your inner clarity, your sense of alignment, your ability to feel at home in your own skin. Each silence becomes a kind of internal dissonance. You nod when you don't agree. You say, "It's fine," when it isn't. You withhold truths not because they don't matter, but because they matter too much. Over time, this habit becomes a kind of emotional exile. You remain in relationships, jobs, situations where the real you is never quite allowed to speak. You begin to mistrust your own instincts, not because they're wrong, but because you've trained yourself to ignore them. And the longer you avoid the discomfort of honesty, the more distant your inner voice becomes. It doesn't shout anymore. It whispers. Then it fades. The truth is, hard conversations are rarely about the words themselves. They're about choosing courage over comfort. They're about honoring reality even when it's inconvenient. And they're about creating space, not just for conflict, but for clarity, healing, and real connection. Not every truth needs to be told right away, but none of them deserve to be buried forever. Because every time you choose silence to avoid discomfort, you teach your nervous system that honesty is dangerous, that your truth is too sharp to be held, that peace must always come at your own expense. But peace built on suppression isn't peace, it's performance. And you deserve more than a life of quiet resentment and rehearsed smiles. You deserve relationships where your voice is welcome. You deserve to feel real. It starts quietly. Just one more scroll, one more bite, one more episode. Even though your eyes are heavy and the clock's already crept past sleep, you tell yourself it's harmless, a reward, a small indulgence after a long day. But this whisper, just one more, isn't always about pleasure. It's about delay, about avoidance, about stretching the moment just far enough to forget what's underneath. In moderation, these choices feel manageable, but repetition has a way of reshaping your habits, softly, almost kindly. Before long, the one more becomes routine, automatic. You don't choose it so much as fall into it, and each time, the permission grows stronger, the boundary weaker. The pause between intention and impulse shrinks until the act is reflex. Historically, ancient philosophers spoke of temperance not as denial, but as the art of knowing when enough is truly enough. In their quiet world, enough was a skill. Today, with endless access and constant stimulation, that line blurs. You no longer reach for joy. You reach for escape. The screen glows, the bag empties, the silence is filled again. But it's not presence, it's not peace. You're not broken for wanting more. That desire is human. But when just one more becomes a pattern, it's worth asking, what are you really seeking? Relief? Comfort? Numbness? And what would happen if you sat in the discomfort instead of smoothing it away? Sometimes real freedom isn't in having more, but in gently learning to stop. Imagine yourself standing in silence, holding too much, but insisting it's fine. You manage the weight alone. You rearrange the pain, disguise the cracks, perfect the smile. Not because you don't need help, but because asking feels heavier than carrying. Somewhere along the way, vulnerability became more threatening than suffering. So you wear independence like armor, even when it starts to sink. In 17th century letters from widowed women in rural Europe, scholars have found quiet patterns, requests that were never written. Instead, they described weather, chores, and polite greetings. Their needs, food, warmth, comfort, were hidden between the lines, buried beneath pride and social decorum. To ask was to risk being judged, or worse, pitied. So instead, they endured. You may recognize that instinct, the hesitation to reach out, the rehearsed "I'm fine" that spills from your lips even when your voice shakes. You measure your worth by how little you require, how much you can endure without complaint. The isolation becomes a performance of strength, but even armor rusts. Even the strongest back breaks beneath unshared weight. The danger isn't just the pain, it's the slow erosion of connection. When you never ask, others stop offering. When you always cope alone, loneliness becomes familiar, even comforting. But independence without intimacy is not freedom, it's quiet exile. So imagine yourself, not crumbling, but softening, not collapsing, but allowing someone to see, just enough to share the load, not because you've failed, but because you were never meant to carry everything alone. The screen glows long past midnight. Deadlines whisper, goals loom, and so you keep going. Just one more hour, one more task. The world has taught you that rest is weakness, that sleep is a luxury for those with nothing to prove. So you learn to ignore your body's quiet protests. You convince yourself that discipline means overriding fatigue. But nature does not hustle. The moon does not rise faster when it's behind schedule. Trees do not bloom on command. Every living thing obeys a rhythm, a slow, spiral dance that makes space for rest as much as growth. When you push yourself past that rhythm, something inside you begins to misalign. Sleep is not just recovery, it's repair, a neurological reset. Memory is sorted, emotions softened, the immune system strengthened. Without it, thoughts grow jagged, focus frays. Even joy begins to feel distant, like trying to smile through fog. You may still be moving, but the self inside, the soul, is slowly dissolving beneath the motion. There was a time when sleep was sacred. Ancient Egyptians believed it was a return to the gods. In many indigenous cultures, dreams were seen as guidance, not distractions. But somewhere along the way, modern culture crowned productivity as the new divinity. And in that temple, sleep became a sacrifice. You don't have to abandon your ambition, but you can begin to question the cost. The version of you that stays up another hour might finish the project, but at what price? Clarity? Patience? The ability to be present tomorrow? Imagine instead a life that respects the ebb and flow, where progress isn't measured in constant output, but in sustainable rhythm, where you rise not from exhaustion, but from rest, and where your dreams, both waking and sleeping, are allowed to guide you, not just be postponed. Imagine yourself walking a familiar path, same morning routine, same thoughts on repeat, same minor frustrations you no longer question. The days blur together, not from speed, but sameness. You function, you respond, you plan the next thing, but the why behind it all, why you started, why it matters, remains unasked. Reflection isn't always dramatic. It doesn't arrive with candles or journals or sudden revelations. Sometimes it's just a pause, a quiet check-in, a moment of inward glance. But when those moments vanish entirely, something in you begins to sleepwalk. Without reflection, life becomes reaction. You respond to emails, not meaning. You chase goals, not growth. You solve problems, but never ask if they're yours to carry. The self becomes automatic, polite, presentable, efficient, and quietly unknown. In earlier eras, reflection was embedded into the rhythm of life. Pilgrimages, Sabbaths, seasonal rituals. These weren't just religious acts. They were structural pauses, invitations to look inward, to ask, what has changed? What have I become? Today, the pace rarely breaks, and so reflection becomes optional until it isn't. Often it returns in crisis, uninvited, in the quiet after loss, in the shock of regret, or in the eerie moment when you realize you no longer recognize the person living your life. The absence of reflection doesn't just hide the truth, it erodes the story. Without it, you forget where you've been. You lose the thread of who you meant to be. And years can pass, full of effort, full of noise, without meaningfully belonging to you. You don't need daily epiphanies. But you do need moments, even small ones. The pause after a conversation. The question before a yes. The silence before sleep. Because life is not just what happens, it's what you notice and what you carry forward. And without reflection, even your own story can become a stranger to you. Imagine waking up and immediately scanning the day ahead. Your mind doesn't ease into the morning, it accelerates. Every task feels like a ticking clock. The unread emails, the unfinished work, the forgotten message, they all pulse with the same urgency. Your body tightens before you've even left bed, as if the day is already behind and you're scrambling to catch up. Over time, this constant elevation of urgency becomes invisible. You don't notice that your shoulders rarely drop, that your breath stays shallow, that your thoughts never fully settle. You start to treat everything, deadlines, errands, decisions, as if they carry the same weight, as if delay equals failure, as if slowing down equals danger. Your nervous system, built to respond to true threat, now fires for calendar reminders and casual texts. This isn't about productivity. It's about survival mode that never resets. When your brain learns to associate every obligation with stress, it begins to rewrite its baseline. Rest feels suspicious. Ease feels like a trap. And even when you've done enough for the day, You find yourself opening another tab, checking one more thing, just to quiet the inner noise for a moment. But stress, when constant, loses its edge. It doesn't help you move faster. It just dulls your ability to feel calm when calm is safe. You lose touch with the natural rhythms of effort and recovery, urgency and exhale. Everything becomes a sprint. There are no walks anymore. The truth is, not every task is urgent. Not every email is a crisis. Not every delay is a failure. Relearning this means letting your body remember what calm feels like. It means choosing not to respond immediately. It means reminding yourself that rest is not the enemy of progress. It's the foundation of it. Because when urgency is constant, you burn through your days on high alert and call it normal. But life isn't meant to be lived in emergency mode. It's meant to be lived. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. Just a small change. Wake up earlier, write the first page, go for that run. The promise is quiet, internal, invisible to everyone but you. And that's part of the comfort. No one sees if you slip. No one holds you to it, except you. But when tomorrow comes, the resistance is louder than the intention. You delay. You negotiate. You bury the goal beneath distractions and justifications. And though no one calls it out, something inside you notices. Not just the missed action, but the missed chance to show up for yourself. You feel it, not as guilt, but as erosion. A soft, steady wearing away of your own belief in your word. Over time, these small betrayals accumulate. You stop setting goals altogether, or set them with a shrug, already anticipating the break. You say things like, "I'm bad at discipline," or "I never finish what I start," not realizing those phrases aren't identity. They're patterns formed through repetition. And every time you ghost your own goals, those patterns deepen. Ancient Stoics believed self-respect was built not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of alignment, doing what you said you would, even when no one's watching, especially then, because that's how trust is formed, not just with others, but with yourself. Imagine the quiet power of keeping even one promise, of saying, "I'll try," and following through, just enough to remind yourself that your word still means something, that you're still someone worth showing up for, even when no one's watching, especially then. Imagine yourself pushing through another tired morning. Your shoulders ache, your eyes blur, but you keep moving. You tell yourself it's normal, just stress, just a phase. You silence the discomfort with coffee, stretch past the stiffness, and ignore the way your breath grows shallow. The body whispers, but you treat it like background noise, inconvenient, annoying, easily dismissed. But the body doesn't forget. What you call fatigue, it calls depletion. What you label as minor tension, it registers as a warning. And when ignored long enough, the signals don't fade, they sharpen. A headache becomes a migraine. A sore muscle becomes injury. The quiet ache becomes chronic pain. The message doesn't disappear. It only grows louder until listening is no longer optional. In ancient Ayurvedic texts, illness was seen not as an isolated event, but as an accumulation of neglect, imbalance, misalignment. The healers looked not just at symptoms, but at rhythms. When sleep changed, when appetite faltered, when the skin felt different. These shifts were signs, not nuisances. The body was speaking, and health meant listening early. You may be told to push through, to perform, to produce, but the cost of ignoring your body's language is subtle erosion. It doesn't collapse overnight. It frays, quietly. A little less energy here, a little more pain there, until the life you're trying to live is wrapped in resistance. So imagine yourself, not stopping, but noticing, not panicking, but pausing. Fatigue is not weakness, it's information. And listening is not surrender, it's care. The kind that keeps you whole before you have to repair. You sit there, waiting for the feeling to arrive, that spark, that surge, the invisible force that will lift you into motion. Maybe it'll come after this scroll, this snack, this second of silence. Maybe tomorrow, or maybe it won't. Because the truth is quieter than you hoped. Motivation isn't a starting point, it's a side effect. In ancient craftsmanship, builders did not wait to feel inspired before shaping stone. They started with the first strike, rough, uneven, imperfect, and through repetition, rhythm formed. Focus sharpened. What began as effort became art. The momentum wasn't gifted, it was grown. Modern life teaches the opposite, that the right podcast, the right quote, the right sunrise will suddenly shift something inside you. But days pass, the quote fades, and the task remains. Not because you're lazy, but because waiting feels safer than beginning. There's comfort in imagining the ideal version of yourself, the one who wakes early, works efficiently, never doubts. But that version only comes alive through doing, not all at once, but gradually. A cup washed, a sentence written, a quiet walk taken when the mind resists. Each small act builds a path your mind can follow. Neuroscience calls this the behavioral activation loop, action preceding emotion. Mood follows motion. The mind responds not just to thought, but to pattern, to the evidence that you're already in motion, already capable, already becoming. So imagine yourself taking one step, not because you're ready, but because it's time. The surface beneath you doesn't need to be solid. You'll find footing as you move. The wind doesn't have to be at your back. The breath you take is enough. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that the very act of moving becomes the reason to keep going. Imagine yourself sitting in a calm room. No conflict, no tension, no urgency. For a moment, everything is still, and yet you feel uneasy. You scroll your phone, waiting for a message that stings. You overthink a harmless glance. You pick a fight you don't mean to start, not because you want pain, but because peace feels unfamiliar. And somewhere deep down, you don't trust it. When drama becomes the norm, stillness feels suspicious. For some, this pattern starts early. Environments where calm never lasted long, where love came with conditions and attention was earned through escalation. Over time, your nervous system adapts. It learns to expect the crash after quiet, to stay braced, to mistake intensity for intimacy. So, when life gets peaceful, when things feel easy, you feel distant from yourself, numb, disconnected. And instead of investigating that discomfort, you unconsciously create disruption, a vague accusation, a passive jab, a sudden overreaction, anything to restore the familiar pulse of chaos. This isn't selfishness, it's survival logic. Somewhere along the way, your mind learned that safety lives in reactivity. That loud emotion means you're still alive. That silence is a prelude to abandonment. But living this way is exhausting. It makes peace feel unsafe. It turns connection into conflict. It convinces you that calm is boring, or worse, dangerous. You don't just fear being numb, you start to manufacture storms just to remember how to feel. In earlier cultures, drama was reserved for ceremony or art, a controlled outlet. But now, with constant notifications, arguments, and headlines, drama is available on demand and easily internalized. To unlearn this reflex, you have to sit in stillness long enough to notice what rises, to name the discomfort without feeding it, to let peace linger without sabotage. Because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't surviving chaos. It's believing you deserve to live without it. Imagine sitting in front of a long list of things you were supposed to have done by now. The deadlines blend together. The decisions feel stacked. The pressure builds, not in a sharp panic, but in a slow, paralyzing wait. You don't move. You don't decide. You just stop. Not because you don't care, but because the mountain feels too large to climb, and every path forward feels equally uncertain. Freezing when overwhelmed doesn't look dramatic. It looks quiet, still. From the outside, it can be mistaken for laziness, or avoidance, or calm. But inside, it feels like drowning in shallow water, aware, awake, but unable to act. The mind races through possibilities, trying to find the perfect place to begin. The heart beats faster, the body stays still, and the longer you pause, the more impossible everything begins to feel. This freeze response is ancient, rooted in survival. When neither fight nor flight feels possible, your brain defaults to stillness. It's not weakness, it's not failure, it's protection. But in a world that demands constant motion and output, this protective stillness gets misread, and you start to mistrust it. You call it laziness. You scold yourself for not pushing through. You treat your stuckness as something shameful, instead of something to be understood. But the truth is, overwhelm isn't a signal to give up. It's a signal to go smaller. The solution isn't to leap the whole mountain. It's to look for the next foothold. One task, one line, one breath. And then another. Stillness, when chosen, is rest. But stillness born from fear, left unchecked, becomes paralysis. You don't need to conquer everything at once. You just need to move in the direction of possible. And even that first small shift, choosing to begin before you feel ready, can be the thing that breaks the spell. Because freezing isn't failure. It's just your nervous system asking for help. And the help can start as simply as this. What's the smallest thing I can do next? You adjust your tone in conversation. You nod even when you disagree. You say yes to stay easy, stay pleasant, stay accepted. It doesn't feel dramatic, just small shifts. A softened opinion. A laugh that comes a little too quickly. A version of yourself sculpted gently by what others want, expect, or need you to be. At first, it feels like adaptability, like social intelligence, like kindness. And maybe it is for a while. But slowly, the bending becomes a habit. You filter your words so often, you forget what you would have said without the filter. You mirror others so easily, you lose track of what your own reflection looked like. You become everyone's version of you, except your own. This isn't new. From childhood, approval shaped survival. Being agreeable meant safety, praise, belonging. But if you spend long enough shapeshifting, your center begins to blur. You struggle to answer questions like, what do I want? What do I believe? What would I say if I weren't trying to please anyone? You feel it in the quiet moments, when there's no one to perform for, and the silence feels uncomfortable instead of restful. You realize you don't quite know what you think without hearing someone else say it first. You've built connection, yes, but at the cost of authenticity. And authenticity isn't loud. It's not defiance or rebellion. It's the quiet act of choosing truth over approval, of letting your edges show, of allowing someone to dislike you and surviving that discomfort. Because each time you choose to be fully yourself, you return to someone you were never meant to leave behind. Imagine yourself pacing the same corner of thought again. You replay a sentence you said days ago. You imagine 10 versions of how something might go wrong. You dissect a message, a glance, a silence, searching for meanings that may not even exist. It feels productive, careful, smart, but beneath it is stillness. You're not moving forward, you're orbiting. Overthinking often wears the costume of clarity. It looks like preparation. It feels like control. But slowly, it becomes a cage. One where possibilities multiply until action feels impossible. You replace movement with analysis. What if I fail? What if they judge me? What if I'm wrong? Each question branches into more, and soon you're tangled in a forest of what-ifs, none of them real, but all of them loud. The Stoic philosophers warned of this centuries ago. Epictetus taught that worry is wasted effort over things not yet real. And still, the human mind returns to the cycle, because imagined outcomes are safe. They don't demand risk. They don't invite rejection. But they also don't bring change. You may find that decisions grow heavier the longer they're held. What started as a simple task becomes unbearable, not because it changed, but because your thoughts wrapped too tightly around it. Eventually, the delay becomes a substitute for the fear you haven't named. And the loop continues. So, imagine yourself stepping outside the loop. Let the outcome remain unknown. Let the next step be imperfect. Thought is only useful when it serves motion. The rest is noise disguised as safety. You tell yourself, I need to improve. You promise, I'll start soon. The words feel powerful in the moment, like declarations, like change, but they dissolve quietly in the hours that follow. Be better. Do more. Fix everything. But when? How? Where do you begin? The mind can't act on fog. Without specifics, intention becomes illusion, a comforting placeholder for movement without the discomfort of actual change. Ancient navigators didn't sail with the hope of going somewhere. They fixed their eyes on stars, mapped distances, chose routes with care. Vague direction led only to drifting. In the modern world, vague intentions often disguise fear. To say, I'll write a book someday feels safe, until you ask what chapter, what hour, what draft comes first. Abstract goals keep you distant from the tension of reality. As long as the starting line stays undefined, you never have to cross it. Behavioral science shows that the more precise your goal, the more likely your brain is to engage with it. Work out more means nothing to your nervous system. But stretch for 5 minutes after waking does. It gives the mind a shape to follow, a place to anchor momentum. Imagine instead of reaching for better, you chose one small thing. Drink water before coffee. Read one page before checking your phone. Go to bed 10 minutes earlier. Tiny choices. Tangible ones. Not flashy, but real. You don't need grand visions. You need handles. Points of contact between the ideal and the actual. That's where change begins. Not in the desire, but in the definition. Not in the someday, but in the now. Imagine someone replies to your message with a short sentence, no emoji, no punctuation. You reread it. You start wondering, are they annoyed? Am I being too much? Did I say something wrong? Hours pass, and the moment lingers longer than it should, not because of what they said, but because of how it felt to you. When your sense of self is brittle, even silence can feel like an attack. Making things personal isn't about ego in the traditional sense. It's not arrogance, it's fragility. A hidden worry that you're not quite enough, that you're being evaluated constantly, that people's moods, mistakes, or indifference are coded messages about you. So when a friend forgets to call back, it's rejection. When someone disagrees, it's disrespect. When you're left out, it's confirmation. This constant decoding burns energy, and slowly it becomes your lens, scanning for hidden insults, bracing for slights, preparing to explain or defend or disappear. Your nervous system becomes a watchdog, treating neutrality as threat. Historically, honor cultures thrived on personal interpretation. Slights were public, and status meant everything. But in modern life, most of what others do isn't about you. People are distracted, preoccupied, hurting in ways you can't see. Yet when your self-image is shaky, their actions become mirrors you keep checking, and every unclear reflection chips away at your peace. The tragedy is that this habit obscures connection. It turns potential allies into threats. It makes kindness feel suspicious and makes casual comments feel like judgment. You can't receive what's offered because you're too busy protecting what feels unfinished inside. But the ego you're defending, it isn't all of you. It's just the version you think others might accept. Sometimes the way forward is to loosen your grip, to let people mean only what they say, to allow a moment to pass without turning it into proof, because not everything is personal, and not everything needs to hurt. Imagine an idea stirring quietly inside you, a project, a message, a change you've been meaning to make. It feels important. It feels like it matters. And yet, you wait. You tweak, you plan, you gather more inspiration, more tools, more time. You tell yourself you're not procrastinating, you're preparing, you just want to do it right. But days pass, then weeks, the window doesn't open, and what once felt like potential starts to feel like pressure. This is the perfection delay. It wears the mask of intention, but underneath it is fear. Fear of being seen unfinished, fear of getting it wrong, fear of beginning without guarantees. You convince yourself that you're being thoughtful, when really, you're stalling. You wait for the perfect time, the perfect version of yourself, the perfect set of conditions. But perfection, by nature, doesn't arrive. It expands, always one step beyond where you are. And while you wait, life moves. Opportunities drift. Confidence erodes, not from failure, but from inertia. The longer you hold back, the more your mind starts to question whether you ever had what it takes. The longer the delay, the heavier the first step becomes. What you forget is that clarity comes through doing, not before it. Growth is not a prize for getting it right the first time. It's the result of showing up, messy and unsure, again and again. Perfection doesn't build mastery, practice does. And courage is not the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear write the timeline. There will never be a moment that feels entirely safe to begin. But you don't need perfect to start. You only need honest effort, a willingness to be seen in progress, and the grace to learn out loud. Because while waiting feels safe, it costs you something invisible: momentum, trust in yourself, and the quiet joy of watching something unfold in real time. Start now. Begin before you're ready. That's where the real growth lives. You keep the background noise playing, music, podcasts, chatter from a screen, anything to fill the silence. Your hands stay busy. Your eyes jump from task to task. When there's a moment of quiet, you reach instinctively for your phone, your to-do list, your next distraction. Stillness feels unnatural, even threatening, like a space you're not supposed to enter. In a world that equates motion with meaning, doing nothing feels wrong. Rest is seen as wasted time. Silence is awkward, and the idea of sitting alone with your own thoughts, without a plan, without a purpose, feels almost indulgent, or worse, unsafe. But beneath that discomfort is something you might need to hear. Stillness doesn't scream, it whispers. And if you never pause long enough to listen, you lose the thread of your own story. You forget what your inner voice sounds like beneath the noise of others. You become a stranger to your own mind, not because you lack clarity, but because you've never let it surface. Historically, stillness was sacred. Monks, philosophers, and healers alike sought silence, not as escape, but as return. A return to the self, the body, the moment. It's where reflection begins, where pain speaks honestly, where ideas take root. Stillness isn't laziness, it's presence. It's choosing, even briefly, not to outrun yourself, to sit in the quiet, let the dust settle, and ask, what am I avoiding? What do I feel when I'm not numbing? Who am I when no one else is watching? You don't need to be always moving forward. Sometimes, standing still is the most honest thing you can do. Imagine yourself measuring, not aloud, not with numbers, but silently, beneath every interaction. You notice who replied late, who forgot, who asked but didn't offer. A quiet ledger begins to form, invisible but heavy. You replay moments, not for memory, but for math. You start to feel owed or overdrawn. Relationships become records. Trust becomes balance sheets. In ancient Roman ledgers, merchants tracked every coin, every grain, every promise. Some friendships dissolved over fractions, not out of cruelty, but precision. Fairness, they believed, depended on exactness. But when emotion enters the equation, something changes. Care doesn't add up the same way. Loyalty can't be measured in even lines. Still, it's tempting. Especially when you give more than you receive, when you listen more than you're heard. Tallying becomes self-defense, a way to justify the imbalance. But the longer you keep score, the more distance you create. Acts of kindness become bargaining chips. Moments of care start to feel like debts. And slowly, the warmth fades, not from neglect, but from accounting. You may believe that fairness protects you, that if you don't track, you'll be taken for granted. But real connection rarely runs on totals. It runs on trust, on grace, on forgetting sometimes, on giving without needing return. Not endlessly, but without a calculator in hand. So imagine yourself letting go of one small tally, not because it didn't matter, but because they matter more. Relationships aren't ledgers, they're living things, and they breathe easier when you stop counting. The fork rises and falls without thought. Bites disappear before they're tasted. Eyes on a screen, mind elsewhere, your body goes through the motions, but the moment of eating is already gone. Not shared, not savored, just fuel delivered with speed. And quietly, a ritual once sacred becomes routine background noise. Throughout most of history, eating was ceremony. In ancient Greece, meals were moments of pause, accompanied by conversation, offered to the gods. In Japan, each dish is prepared with intentionality, the act of eating shaped by silence and presence. Even in simple villages, across generations, families gathered not just to eat, but to be. Now, food is often consumed on autopilot, at desks, in cars, during meetings, between errands. The rhythm of chewing becomes mechanical. You scroll, respond, multitask, treating nourishment as something to check off the list rather than something to experience. And the body notices, not just in digestion, but in feeling. You finish a meal and still feel empty, not from lack of food, but lack of attention. The nervous system digests differently when you're calm. The body processes nourishment more fully when you're present. Lowness sends signals. I am safe. I can rest. But haste teaches the opposite. That survival matters more than satisfaction. That the body is a tool, not a companion. What if, just once, you sat without distraction, felt the warmth of the plate, smelled the spices, noted the texture, the first flavor, the slow bloom of taste? What if eating became a conversation between you and the present moment? You don't need to turn every meal into meditation, but you can reclaim a few minutes of stillness, to chew slowly, to listen inward, to let the body know it matters. Because the way you eat isn't just about hunger, it's about how you choose to care for yourself in a world that tells you to hurry. Imagine sending a vague message, I'm fine, don't worry about it. But what you really mean is, please ask again. Please notice I'm not okay. Prove to me that I matter. And when they don't, a cold feeling sets in. Not just disappointment, but confirmation. They don't care. I knew it. This is the logic of emotional testing. Quiet, often subconscious, but powerful. When you don't feel safe expressing your needs directly, you begin to create traps instead. You cancel plans to see if they'll insist. You stay silent to see if they'll reach out. You hide pain behind sarcasm, hoping someone will hear the ache underneath. What starts as a desire for closeness becomes a game of emotional chess. But it's a game no one really wins. Testing isn't manipulation in the villainous sense. It's desperation in disguise. It's an attempt to gain control in a space where vulnerability feels dangerous. Because if someone passes the test, maybe you can believe they care. And if they fail, you're spared the risk of asking for what you need and not receiving it. But over time, this habit corrodes connection. People sense the tension, even if they can't name it. They start to feel like they're being watched, judged, scored. Intimacy becomes effortful. Conversations feel like mazes. And the person doing the testing becomes lonelier, not because others don't care, but because they were never given a real chance to show it. Historically, trust was built through shared rituals, spoken needs, and time. But in modern emotional landscapes, where vulnerability often feels unsafe, testing becomes a substitute, a safer gamble, a shield. But it comes at a cost. Because if you're always asking people to prove themselves, you never let them simply be with you. And sometimes, the most radical act of trust is this: to state what you need without camouflage, to believe they might care without making them guess. Imagine carrying a story inside you, one shaped by hurt, by loss, by things that didn't go the way they should have. Over time, it becomes more than memory. It becomes your compass, your lens, your introduction. You don't just remember the pain, you become the person who was hurt. The identity takes root not because you want to suffer, but because it gives meaning to the suffering. It tells you why you are the way you are. Pain, when first felt, is sharp and unmistakable. But with time, it softens into shape. Something familiar, something almost comforting. You learn to protect it. You repeat the story, even silently, to yourself. This is why I keep my distance. This is why I don't trust easily. This is why I stay quiet. The wound becomes a reason. The scar becomes a map. And slowly, healing starts to feel like erasure. What if letting go means losing the story? What if becoming whole means becoming unrecognizable? These are quiet fears, rarely spoken. Because pain, even when unwanted, offers certainty. It explains your caution, justifies your reactions, shields you from vulnerability by giving you a history to point to. But there's a cost. The longer you cling to pain as identity, the more it limits what you allow yourself to become. You stop reaching beyond the narrative. You stop imagining a version of you who isn't defined by what happened. And healing, true healing, starts to feel like betrayal. As if moving forward means denying how much it hurt. But healing isn't forgetting. It's not denying the impact. It's choosing to loosen your grip on the version of you who only knew how to survive. It's allowing room for new patterns, new responses, new stories. It's accepting that the pain shaped you, but it doesn't have to contain you. You are not your wound. You are the one who lived through it. And that means, quietly, patiently, you are allowed to become someone else. You save the post, screenshot the quote, add the book to your cart, watch another video that tells you you're capable, powerful, worthy. For a moment, it feels like movement, like change, like transformation is already underway. The words stir something in you, hope, ambition, clarity. But then, you scroll past, close the tab, file it away for later. Again, you're not alone in this. We live in an era of inspiration on demand. Motivation is everywhere, packaged into reels, affirmations, highlight reels of reinvention. But inspiration, when consumed in excess and never applied, begins to lose its weight. It becomes noise, a form of procrastination dressed as progress. You start to chase the feeling of change rather than change itself. You surround yourself with reminders of who you could be, but those reminders pile up like mental clutter. Spiritual wallpaper, beautiful, moving, but unmoving. In earlier times, inspiration wasn't a commodity. It came slowly, through stories passed down, long walks, hard-won lessons. And when it arrived, it asked something of you, reflection, movement, discipline. But now it's easy to collect without commitment, to feel stirred but never step forward. None of this means you're lazy. It means you're full, but not fulfilled, saturated with why, but hesitant on how. But maybe the next time something inspires you, you pause before saving it. You let it sit. You ask, what would it look like to live this, even for 5 minutes? Because inspiration is meant to burn, not just gently warm you, but ignite action. And action is always quieter than intention, but infinitely more powerful. Imagine yourself scanning your calendar. Another dinner, another call, another event you agreed to without pausing. At the time, it felt easier to say yes, maybe even necessary. You didn't want to disappoint. You didn't want to disappear. But now, the week feels crowded, not with joy, but with obligations. You attend, you smile, you engage, but underneath, something quiet asks, when do you come home to yourself? In the early 20th century, letters from city dwellers in industrial Paris often described their social lives in meticulous detail, visits, salons, endless gatherings. But between the lines, exhaustion seeped through. One writer confessed to accepting every invitation for fear that absence would erase me. They feared fading from memory more than they feared losing themselves. That fear still lingers today. You RSVP before considering your bandwidth. You reply, sure, before asking what you actually want. And each overcommitment chips away at your time, your rest, your clarity. You start mistaking presence for connection, busyness for belonging. But real presence requires space. Real connection needs energy. And when everything is yes, nothing feels intentional. You may believe that being everywhere makes you matter, that staying visible keeps you remembered, but a scattered presence rarely leaves a lasting impression. You become a blur in your own schedule, exhausted, stretched thin, and slowly disconnected from what actually nourishes you. So imagine yourself choosing no, not to reject, but to return, not to isolate, but to preserve. A quiet evening alone isn't absence, it's anchoring. And you're allowed to be missed. You hesitate, but only for a moment. A flicker of discomfort rises in your chest, a tightening in the throat, a quiet signal that something feels off. But you dismiss it. You reason your way around it. You choose logic, evidence, appearances. And in doing so, you silence a language older than thought. Gut feelings are often misunderstood, labeled irrational, unreliable. But neuroscientists now know that intuition isn't magic. It's pattern recognition, refined by experience and stored deep in the body. The enteric nervous system, the second brain in your gut, communicates with the mind constantly, shaping decisions before you can explain why. Throughout history, instinct kept us alive. Hunters sensed danger before it appeared. Mothers knew when something was wrong, even in silence. In many cultures, dreams and bodily sensations were seen as sacred messages, wisdom from within. But modern life trained that wisdom out of us. We're told to trust data, not feelings, to explain, not sense, to override, not pause. But intuition doesn't shout, it nudges. A pause before saying yes, a twinge when someone smiles, a strange relief when you finally choose to walk away. When you ignore these signals again and again, the body stops speaking. Or rather, it speaks louder through stress, restlessness, chronic tension. Symptoms that were once signals now echo unchecked. Imagine instead that you treated your gut feeling like a colleague, not a contradiction. A quiet voice that doesn't need to win, only to be heard. What would it change? The email you didn't send, the meeting you delayed, the path you almost took. You can still use logic, still weigh pros and cons, but leave room for instinct. That silent inner compass isn't working against you. It's a deeper kind of knowing, one that often sees long before the mind can explain. Imagine waking up and the first thought isn't what's ahead, but how long until it's over. You check the calendar, not for milestones, but for relief. The next long weekend, the trip months away, the moment you can crawl back into bed. You're not living toward something. You're enduring, just enough to reach the next pause. This is escape mode, a quiet pattern where the present becomes something to survive. It doesn't always look bleak. On the outside, there might be laughter, plans, even accomplishments. But inside, there's a ticking clock, counting down until you get to leave your own life, if only temporarily. Sleep becomes refuge. Friday becomes salvation. The vacation isn't just a break, it's a glimpse of the self you wish you could be more often. You're not alone in this. In many modern cultures, routines are built less for meaning than maintenance. Work weeks blur, days off vanish in errands, and without conscious design, life becomes something you postpone, not inhabit. Historically, people moved with the rhythm of nature, harvests, seasons, light. Rest was built into the cycle. Celebration wasn't escape, it was expression. But today, the pace is different, constant, and often misaligned with the human spirit. So you escape, not because you're lazy, but because you're starving. For quiet, for beauty, for something that feels like yours. The danger is not in needing breaks. That's human. The danger is never asking, what would a life look like that I didn't need to escape? Because escape mode doesn't just delay joy, it drains it. It convinces you that fulfillment is a distant reward, not a daily possibility. Peace isn't only found in distant places or future dates. Sometimes It's built in small changes, in reclaiming 1 hour, in rethinking one yes, in realizing you deserve a life that doesn't feel like a prison between vacations. Imagine waking each day with a wide horizon in front of you. No clear destination, no set direction. Everything feels open. Endless choices, infinite possibilities. You tell yourself this is freedom, not being tied down, not having to choose. You move from one thing to another, following what feels urgent, what feels easy, what others are doing. But as time passes, a quiet unease sets in. You're always moving, but never arriving. Always doing, but rarely fulfilled. This is what drifting without priorities feels like. You mistake motion for meaning. You keep busy, but nothing quite sticks. And beneath the surface, there's a kind of hollow exhaustion, a sense that your life is filling up with things that don't actually belong to you. You say yes more than you mean to. You start projects and abandon them. You chase goals you didn't choose. Every path feels equally valid, yet none feel right. The absence of clear values doesn't feel like chaos at first. It feels like flexibility. But over time, that openness becomes disorientation. You don't know what to measure decisions against. You don't know which discomforts are worth enduring or which opportunities are truly yours. You become a mirror of your environment, reflecting urgency, desire, ambition, but not guided by anything solid inside. Priorities aren't about restriction. They're about rhythm, about knowing what matters enough to say no to everything else. Without them, freedom becomes a blur. You wander and call it growth, but you're only learning how to stay lost. And yet, the compass is always there, quiet, beneath the noise. You find it not by chasing more, but by listening more deeply. What gives you energy? What quietly aches to be built? What do you return to again and again, even when no one's watching? The path becomes clearer the moment you choose not what's possible, but what's true. And from that truth, a direction forms. Not rigid, not perfect, but yours. Your eyes flicker away, just for a second, maybe less. Someone's glance meets yours and you shift focus. Downward, to the side, anywhere but directly back. You may not even notice it. It feels automatic, like a habit you never chose. But over time, it becomes a quiet language your body speaks. I shouldn't be seen. I don't want to be known. Avoiding eye contact isn't always about shyness. Sometimes it's self-protection. Sometimes it's learned. A childhood of scrutiny, a past rejection, an inner voice that still whispers, they're judging you. So your gaze withdraws, guarded, careful. And yet, each time you look away, a subtle lesson is reinforced. Visibility is vulnerability, and vulnerability is dangerous. But that's not the whole truth. In most cultures, eye contact signals presence, grounding, a silent, steady kind of strength. It doesn't mean dominance or confrontation. It means I am here, and I'm not hiding. To hold someone's gaze, even gently, is to build a bridge, a moment of shared space where posturing drops and truth might pass through. It's not about staring, it's about staying. And like any form of confidence, it's learned through repetition. Eye contact is a practice, a muscle, a way of slowly unlearning fear, not by force, but by choosing, one moment at a time, to remain open, to resist the urge to disappear. Imagine allowing yourself to be fully seen, not because you're flawless, but because you're real. And in that quiet steadiness, you teach yourself something even more important than confidence. You were never too much to look at, or not enough. You were always allowed to meet the world head-on. Imagine yourself beginning a sentence with sorry, not because you've done harm, but because you spoke. You ask for help and your voice shrinks. You take up space and immediately try to shrink it back. The apology comes before the need, before the thought, before the breath, not as courtesy, but as habit, a reflex, a quiet plea to not be a burden. In old European etiquette manuals, especially those written for young women in the 1800s, there were entire chapters on gracious restraint, how to be small, agreeable, deferential. Strength was silent. Need was shameful. These scripts, passed down like heirlooms, taught people to apologize for having desires, emotions, even presence. The goal wasn't peace, it was invisibility. And today, those echoes remain. You may find yourself saying sorry when someone bumps into you. You apologize for being late, even if you arrived on time. You apologize for needing clarity, comfort, care. Over time, each sorry carves a shape into you. One where your worth is measured by how little trouble you cause, how easy you are to accommodate. But self-erasure doesn't create harmony. It creates resentment, disconnection, and fatigue. When you chain your value to others' ease, you lose access to your own boundaries. Your feelings become footnotes, your needs optional. So imagine yourself pausing, not to defend, not to justify, but to speak without apology, to ask without shrinking, to exist without explanation, not because you're owed anything, but because you already belong here. You feel something rise, a need, a thought, a discomfort, and just as quickly, you tuck it away. Maybe I'm overthinking. It's probably nothing. It's just me. You say it casually, almost kindly, as if it's a small gesture of grace. But underneath, it's a quiet act of erasure. Over time, just me becomes a script, a habit. You speak less, ask for less. You shrink parts of yourself that once reached outward, your curiosity, your anger, your ache for connection. And others rarely notice the shrinking because you've trained yourself to appear fine, quiet, agreeable, easy to be around. But minimizing doesn't make you smaller. It makes you invisible. What you call too much is often exactly what connects you to others. The intensity, the honesty, the depth of feeling. These are not flaws. They are signals. Proof that you are alive and paying attention. In ancient texts and rituals, the voice was seen as sacred. To speak a truth aloud was to give it shape in the world. Silence, in contrast, was not always peace. It was sometimes protection. And protection can become a prison when you forget how to unlock it. Psychologically, when you repeatedly downplay your needs, the nervous system internalizes that pattern. Over time, you stop even registering what you want, not because it's gone, but because it was taught not to matter. Imagine instead a moment where you say what you feel and leave it there, not explained, not softened, not made small. I need more time. That hurt me. I don't agree. Simple truths, spoken gently, held fully. You are not too sensitive, not too loud, not too complicated. You are human, and just you is not a disclaimer. It's a complete sentence, one worthy of space, of listening, of presence. Imagine yourself in a conversation, smiling, nodding. Everything appears normal, but underneath there's a tightness. A moment from last week still lingers. A tone you didn't like. A comment you never forgot. You never spoke up, but you didn't forget either. And now, there's a quiet distance. You call it being fine. But it's not fine. It's frozen. Holding grudges quietly is a subtle, invisible habit. There's no shouting, no confrontation, just small internal shifts, less warmth, less eye contact, shorter replies. You still show up, but you're guarded. And the person on the other side often doesn't know why. This kind of resentment builds slowly. It doesn't feel like bitterness. It feels like caution, like self-respect, like not letting things slide. But without expression, it becomes something else entirely. A silent erosion, a weight you carry into every interaction with that person. Or worse, with everyone. In many cultures, open conflict is discouraged. We're taught to be polite, to move on, to not make it a thing. So instead of repairing, we withdraw. Instead of speaking, we simmer. The relationship appears intact, but something essential goes missing. Ease. What's more, resentment distorts memory. You begin to rewrite the past through a lens of grievance. Even kind moments feel suspicious. The tension becomes the story. And joy, spontaneity, trust, They all shrink in the shadow of what was never said. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means deciding that your peace is more important than proof. It means having the hard conversation, or releasing the expectation entirely. It means making space again, within yourself. Because unspoken grudges don't protect you. They quietly isolate you. They trade connection for control. And over time, being fine becomes a place you live, instead of a feeling you actually feel. Imagine a moment of stress, an unexpected rejection, a long silence from someone you care about, a day that doesn't go the way you hoped. Without thinking, you reach for something familiar. Maybe it's scrolling until your eyes blur. Maybe it's overeating or isolating or diving into work so deeply that you forget your own name. These responses aren't conscious choices, they're reflexes. Old loops, built long ago to protect you, still running in the background. These coping patterns were never meant to be permanent. They were emergency exits, ways to manage when you didn't yet have safer tools. And at one time, they helped. They got you through. They numbed what you couldn't process. They softened the blow. But survival is not the same as healing, and repeating those loops long after the danger has passed begins to cost more than it protects. The strangest part is how natural it all feels. You don't even notice the return. It feels like home, in a way, familiar, practiced. And in that familiarity, your brain whispers, "This is what we do." So you replay the same script. You quiet the pain, but you also quiet the possibility. Because every time you choose the old pattern, you reinforce the idea that growth is unsafe, that you can't handle new tools, that evolution is too risky. But patterns can be rewritten, not all at once, not by force, but slowly, through awareness. The next time the old urge rises, pause. Ask gently, what am I actually needing right now? Comfort? Connection? Control? Can I meet that need in a new way? Healing doesn't mean never falling back. It means recognizing when you've returned and choosing not to stay. You're allowed to outgrow your survival strategies. You're allowed to leave the loop behind, because what once kept you safe may now be keeping you small. And choosing something unfamiliar but healthier isn't betrayal of the past. It's an invitation to a future that isn't just endured, but truly lived. You rarely notice them, the tiny decisions that shape your day before it even begins. You snooze the alarm. You scroll before standing. You say yes to something you don't want, or no to something you quietly do. It feels harmless, reversible. But these choices, made on autopilot, accumulate. And over time, they stop being just choices. They become who you are becoming. There's no dramatic turning point, no trumpet sound when your life changes course, just small, repeated actions. Where you direct your eyes, where you spend your attention, how you speak to others, how you speak to yourself. You might think, it's just one day, or I'll start fresh next week. But the version of you that's forming isn't waiting. It's being built, moment by moment, in real time. Ancient thinkers believed character was forged in routine, not through grand gestures, but through patterns of behavior so consistent they rewrote identity. And modern science agrees. Your brain streamlines what you do often. What feels casual today becomes unconscious tomorrow. When you ignore these micro-decisions, you surrender your direction. You float instead of steer. Days blur, intentions fade, and years from now, you might look back and wonder how you ended up in a life you didn't choose, when in fact, you did choose it, in increments too small to feel meaningful at the time. But they were. They always are. So when you ask yourself who you want to be, the answer isn't found in vision boards or distant plans. It's in the next small decision, and the one after that. Not perfect, not heroic, just conscious. Just yours. Imagine yourself adjusting things again. A message rewritten 3 times. A schedule rearranged down to the minute. You double check, then check again. You want things to go right, perfect even. But beneath the precision is tension. Each detail begins to feel fragile. Each unknown, a threat. What once sparked curiosity now hums with fear. In the archives of early Dutch navigators, captains mapped their routes in obsessive detail, tracking wind patterns, lunar phases, even imagined dangers. Yet, the sea rarely obeyed. Storms still came. Instruments failed. Control, despite the effort, was never complete. And when their journals are read today, it's clear their greatest burden wasn't failure. It was the fear of what couldn't be predicted. Micromanaging begins with care, but it becomes a prison of imagined consequences. You plan to feel safe, but the planning never ends. You rewrite the outcome in your head so many times, you stop moving altogether. Possibility narrows. Joy dulls. Decisions feel heavier, because anything less than perfect begins to feel like failure. You may believe that control protects you, that the more you manage, the less that can go wrong. But life resists your grip. It stumbles, surprises, and softens only when you loosen your hold. Perfection promises safety, but often delivers exhaustion. So imagine yourself stepping back, letting some edges stay rough, letting the future be unfinished. Not because you're careless, but because life is allowed to unfold without your constant correction. And so are you. You hear something that doesn't sit right. A pause forms in your chest, a thought, a disagreement, a truth you could share. But instead, you nod, you smile, you say nothing. The moment passes. And with it, a piece of you quietly steps back. At first, silence feels like wisdom, like peacekeeping, like choosing harmony over conflict. But over time, it becomes habit. You speak only when it's safe, when it's soft, when it echoes what others already believe. Your opinions gather dust, stored in the corners of your mind, waiting for permission that never comes. In ancient societies, voice was identity. Elders shared perspective not to dominate, but to guide. Communities depended on many views to navigate the world's uncertainty. But in modern life, subtle pressures teach you to blend in meetings, in relationships, in rooms where being liked is easier than being heard. Withholding opinions often seems harmless, but each silence is a small betrayal, not dramatic, just cumulative. One missed opportunity to express what matters, one moment where agreement buys belonging but sells authenticity. And over time, the self that never speaks begins to fade. Psychologists call this self-silencing. It's linked not just to anxiety or low self-worth, but to the simple survival instinct of avoiding rejection. The mind learns, if I stay quiet, I'll stay safe. But safety without expression isn't peace, it's stagnation. Imagine instead a life where your voice enters the room with you, not to argue, not to win, but to exist, to say, here's how I see it, even if it's different, even if it's imperfect. The act of sharing reshapes your presence, not as an echo, but as a whole person. Your voice isn't a disruption. It's a thread in the pattern. Without it, the world hears less and you live smaller. Imagine reaching a goal you worked on for months, a degree, a job, a personal record. You meet the mark, maybe even exceed it. People congratulate you and you smile politely, but inside, it feels flat. No thrill, no sense of arrival, just a quiet thought. What's next? Over time, this becomes a pattern. You accomplish, but you don't absorb. You move forward without pause. The task is finished, so you set another. And then another. The wheel keeps turning, but nothing sticks. When you never celebrate progress, your brain forgets how to register fulfillment. At first, it looks like ambition, drive, high standards. But beneath it is a subtle training of the nervous system to associate effort with anxiety and success with emptiness. You teach yourself that joy is optional, or worse, untrustworthy. Historically, celebration was woven into the rhythm of life. Harvest festivals, rites of passage, shared meals after labor. These weren't indulgences, they were anchors, moments that told the body and mind, you did something, you mattered, you're allowed to feel it. But in modern life, milestones blur into motion. You scroll past your own wins, You downplay them. You say, "It's not a big deal." And soon, your efforts feel like dust. Meaningless not because they were small, but because you never let them land. This creates a numbness, a slow disconnection between doing and feeling. And eventually, you start to wonder what it's all for. Not because you lack purpose, but because you've muted the signals that tell you you're alive. Celebrating doesn't mean throwing a party for every step. It means pausing, breathing, saying, even quietly, "That mattered." Because if you never stop to acknowledge how far you've come, it starts to feel like you've gone nowhere. And a life without celebration isn't discipline, it's deprivation. Imagine walking into a room and scanning every face, not to connect, but to calibrate. Are you too loud? Too quiet? Did you say the right thing? Did they laugh enough? You don't even notice it happening anymore. The constant checking, adjusting, shrinking, performing. You've rehearsed it so many times it feels natural. But underneath it, there's a quiet forgetting of what you think, what you want, what you feel when no one's watching. Fixating on approval doesn't announce itself loudly. It disguises as kindness, as conscientiousness, as being easy to get along with. But slowly, it builds a life that doesn't quite belong to you. You start making choices not based on truth, but on prediction. What will be safest, most liked, least judged? And with every filtered word and edited reaction, your own inner voice fades a little more. The mind, wired to seek belonging, adapts quickly. Praise becomes fuel. Criticism feels like collapse. And soon, even solitude isn't quiet anymore. It's filled with imagined opinions, hypothetical disapproval, silent verdicts from people who aren't even there. The cost of living this way is subtle but deep. You lose touch with the feeling of being known, not just by others, but by yourself. Your values blur. Your instincts dull. Even your joy feels secondhand, shaped more by applause than by inner resonance. But the gaze you truly need, the one that steadies, affirms, and sees, is your own. And reclaiming it starts in small ways. By pausing before you post. By noticing when you're performing. By asking, if no one clapped, would I still choose this? Not to rebel, not to isolate, but to return to something quieter, steadier, more real. Because a life built on approval is never quite yours. And the moment you stop chasing every nod is the moment you start remembering what your own gaze feels like. Unfiltered, unperformed, enough. You read the books, watch the lectures, listen to the podcasts while folding laundry, driving, walking, thinking. You're always gathering new perspectives, deeper understanding, better frameworks for how to live. And for a moment, it feels like progress, like expansion, like you're becoming someone wiser, more prepared, more complete. But knowledge without movement has a strange side effect. It creates the illusion of growth while keeping you comfortably still. You become a collector of insights rather than a participant in your own life. You begin to understand vulnerability more than you allow yourself to feel it. You analyze joy instead of letting it flood through you. You study change instead of stepping into it. It's not that learning is wrong. Far from it. But when learning becomes a substitute for living, something gets stuck. You tell yourself you're just not ready yet, that you need to read one more thing, understand a little more, prepare fully. But life rarely waits for perfect readiness. It responds to presence, to trying, to risking awkwardness, failure, even disappointment. Throughout history, wisdom wasn't measured by how much someone knew, but how deeply they lived what they knew. The philosopher who practiced simplicity, the healer who walked among the sick, the artist who dared to make, not just dream. They moved through the world shaped by their learning, but never stalled by it. So, if you find yourself stuck in study, ask, what have I already learned that I'm not yet living? What would it mean to apply one truth, however clumsily, instead of gathering 10 more? Because true growth isn't found in how much you carry, but in how bravely you walk forward with what you've already got. Imagine yourself resting in a space you know well. The days are predictable, the routines smooth, you avoid friction. dodge the unfamiliar, and rarely feel exposed. It feels safe, even peaceful. But beneath that calm is a quiet stalling. Growth pauses, edges dull, and the same warmth that once soothed you begins to harden into a shell. In ancient farming communities along the Nile, archaeologists found tools that hadn't changed for hundreds of years. The same wooden plows, the same irrigation grooves. They worked well enough, but neighboring cultures, smaller, less fertile, experimented, adapted, took risks, and while the river-fed villages clung to stability, others evolved faster, eventually overtaking them. Comfort had bought time, but at the price of progress. It's tempting to stay with what's known, the familiar job, the relationship with no sharp corners, the identity that never needs defending. But comfort, left unchecked, becomes confinement, not through cruelty, but through repetition. You begin to fear change not because it's dangerous, but because it demands effort. And slowly, the unfamiliar becomes threatening simply because it's unfamiliar. You may believe comfort is the reward. That peace lies in avoiding discomfort. But what you avoid today often becomes what defines you tomorrow. The same safe space that held you can become the thing that traps you, gently, quietly, until you forget how far you've stopped reaching. So imagine yourself stepping outside. Not far, just enough to feel a breeze you haven't felt in a while. Growth isn't built in leaps. It begins with discomfort and a willingness to leave the warmth before it turns cold. You finish the work, close the tab, and feel a flicker of pride, followed quickly by dread. Someone might see this. Someone might comment. So you keep it to yourself. You'd rather not hear what they think, not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Feedback feels like risk, like stepping into a room with no walls. Even a gentle suggestion can sound like failure, a red mark, a missed note, a reminder that you're not quite there yet. And so, to avoid that discomfort, you wrap yourself in silence. No critique, no correction, no exposure, but also no growth. Ancient craftspeople worked under the gaze of mentors, in stone-carving guilds, in calligraphy schools, in every discipline where mastery mattered. Feedback wasn't optional. It was the language of improvement. The critique wasn't personal. It was tradition. A slow chiseling toward excellence. Now, we're taught to protect the ego above all, to curate, to perform, to share only the perfect version. But the truth is, you can't get better at anything you're too afraid to examine. Comfort may protect you from judgment, but it also shields you from progress. Without friction, you can't sharpen. Without reflection, you repeat. Psychologically, avoiding feedback is often rooted in a fixed mindset, the belief that ability is static and criticism confirms your limitations. But growth happens in the stretch, in the tension, in the willingness to hear, even when it stings. Imagine instead receiving feedback as a mirror, not a verdict. A moment to observe, adjust, and refine. What would it change? How far could you go if feedback wasn't a threat, but a tool? You don't need to welcome every opinion, but you can begin to let in the ones that help you see more clearly. Because the ceiling you fear is not made of others' words. It's built from the ones you never let yourself hear. Imagine yourself describing your day. It's just one of those weeks, or a goal. I could never pull that off. Or your own identity. I'm not that kind of person. The words feel harmless, casual, but beneath the surface, they start laying tracks, guiding how you see, how you move, how you limit or allow your own becoming. The way you speak doesn't just reflect your mindset, it shapes it. Language is not neutral. It's a tool of construction. The brain listens. When you say, "I always mess this up," it doesn't argue. It adapts. It builds a story to match your words. That story becomes habit. And over time, habit becomes identity. You don't need to be cruel to yourself to cause harm. Sometimes, it's the repetition of small phrases that tighten the borders of your life. It's too late. That's just how I am. I'm bad at this. You say it often enough, and it becomes the lens, dulling ambition, muting possibility. Historically, words were seen as sacred. Spoken language carried intention. Ancient cultures believed naming something gave it power. In rituals, in prayer, even in everyday greetings, language was an act of shaping reality. But now, in casual conversation and inner monologue, we often speak without awareness. And without realizing it, we narrate ourselves into smaller and smaller rooms. This isn't about forced positivity, it's about precision, about choosing language that's honest and open, instead of, I can't, maybe I'm learning, instead of, I'm a mess, perhaps, I'm adjusting. Tiny shifts. But over time, they soften the ground where growth can take root, because how you speak isn't just expression, it's instruction to your mind, to your emotions, to the life you're quietly building, word by word. Imagine waking up and reaching for your phone before your eyes are even fully open. Notifications light up the screen, messages, headlines, demands. Your mind, still soft from sleep, is pulled instantly into motion. You begin the day not with presence, but with response, not with self, but with stimulus. And before you've had a moment to ask what you need, the world has already answered for you. Without a morning ritual, your day belongs to everything outside you. You drift from task to task, emotion to emotion, reacting instead of choosing. The mind never gets a chance to center itself, to set a tone. You enter conversations without grounding, make decisions without clarity, and by noon, you're already burned out, wondering how the day got away from you so fast. Rituals don't need to be long or elaborate. They don't require silence or incense or sunrise yoga. A ritual is simply a pause, a pattern of intention, a way of telling your nervous system, before the world speaks, I will listen to myself first. It might be a stretch, a sentence in a journal, a quiet sip of tea, a few slow breaths before the current pulls. Because the way you begin matters. It shapes what you notice. It trains your awareness. It tells your body whether it's safe or already behind. Without that anchor, you stay in a kind of emotional drift, always catching up, never quite arriving. And over time, that lack of ritual becomes a deeper lack of direction, of connection, of self-ownership. You become a character written by the day, not the author of it. But even one small act, done each morning with care, can shift the entire tone of your life, not to control the day, but to remember who's inside it. To remind yourself, before I become what the world needs, I will return to who I am. You stop responding, not with anger or tears, but with silence. You tell yourself you're just tired, too busy, over it. But the truth is quieter. It's not that you don't feel anymore. It's that feeling has become too much, too complicated, too risky. So you shut the door, not to others, but to your own heart. At first, this numbness feels like control, a buffer against disappointment, rejection, confusion. You learn to function through the fog, smile when expected, show up, answer "I'm fine" without flinching. And slowly, that mask becomes part of you, not a disguise, but a shield grown permanent. What no one tells you is that numbness doesn't specialize. It doesn't only dull the pain, it dulls the joy too. The laughter feels thinner. The sunset's a little more distant. Even love, the safe kind, feels like something you watch from behind glass. You can remember what it felt like, but it doesn't quite reach you anymore. Many who lived through hardship adapted this way. Generations learned to survive by silencing the inner world. But survival and aliveness are not the same. One gets you through, the other brings you back. To feel again, softly, slowly, is not weakness. It's not recklessness. It's a quiet rebellion against the numbness that told you you were safer without emotion. Because you weren't meant to go through life muted. You were meant to feel, even when it aches, even when it overwhelms, even when it risks breaking you open. Only through that opening can light return. Imagine yourself recalling the same moment again, the thing you said wrong, the chance you missed, the attempt that didn't land. You replay it, not to learn from it, but to wear it. It becomes more than memory. It becomes identity. A quiet headline you carry: I always mess up. I never follow through. I wasn't enough. What began as an event hardens into a belief. And beliefs, over time, build cages you forget how to leave. In ancient Greek tragedy, characters were often haunted by one defining failure: an oath broken, a moment of cowardice, a flaw exposed. And no matter what they did afterward, their story always circled back, not because they couldn't change, but because they didn't believe they could. The chorus would echo their past until it became prophecy. You may find yourself doing the same, introducing yourself through your lowest moments, filtering new experiences through old pain. Each time you retell the failure, you reinforce the boundary. You begin to expect the same ending, no matter the story. Even success starts to feel like an exception, something borrowed, not owned. But identity is not built by what went wrong. It's shaped by what you do next. The mind loves to narrate, and it will always choose a familiar script, especially one that keeps you safe by keeping you small. But familiarity isn't truth, and repetition isn't fate. So imagine yourself interrupting the story, not erasing it, but refusing to recite it again. You are not the worst thing that happened to you, and silence can be the first step out of the cage. You say yes again, even though you're tired, even though your day is already full. You nod, smile, agree, not because you want to, but because it feels easier than the tension of saying no. So you stretch and stretch until you're no longer sure where you end and everyone else begins. At first, it feels like kindness, being flexible, being helpful. You become the reliable one, the one who's always available, always understanding. But beneath the surface, something begins to fray. Your time disappears, your needs fade, and slowly, your inner life becomes overgrown with requests, demands, expectations, like a garden choked with weeds. In older societies, boundaries weren't just personal, they were sacred. Monasteries had walls, not to keep people out, but to preserve focus. Rituals marked transitions between work and rest, self and others, giving and receiving. These structures weren't selfish, they were essential. Without them, there was no balance, only burnout. Psychologically, the inability to set boundaries often stems from fear of being disliked, abandoned, or seen as selfish. The mind learns that being needed equals being loved, so it overextends, again and again, until exhaustion becomes your baseline, until resentment quietly replaces connection. But boundaries are not walls, they are edges, honest lines that say, "This is what I can give without losing myself." They are not rejection, they are protection of your energy, of your clarity, of your ability to truly show up when it matters. Imagine saying no, not with guilt, but with peace. Imagine resting without needing to earn it. Imagine choosing when to give and when to step back. Boundaries don't make you colder, they make you clearer. And from that clarity, real connection can grow, one that includes you, too. Imagine sitting down for a moment of rest. You open your phone, just for a quick scroll. Within seconds, headlines flash across your screen: disasters, scandals, predictions of collapse. One story bleeds into the next. You don't look away. You can't. You tell yourself it's responsible to stay informed. But what you're really doing is feeding your nervous system a steady drip of fear. This is the cost of overexposure. The human mind wasn't built to process global suffering in real time. For most of history, news was local, occasional, and slow. It arrived on horseback or by word of mouth. There was space to respond, to think, to feel, to act. But now, the feed is endless. Every refresh brings a new catastrophe, and with each update, your body reacts. Heart rate rises, muscles tense. You brace as if the crisis is happening to you. But you're not meant to live in a state of constant alert. When you consume too much news, especially crisis-based content, you train your brain to perceive the world as inherently unsafe. This triggers hypervigilance. You start scanning not just the headlines but your life for signs of threat. A harmless silence becomes foreboding. A bad mood feels like a warning. And over time, your worldview shrinks. Joy feels naive. Hope feels foolish. Even small pleasures become muted by guilt or dread. You're not more informed. You're more overwhelmed. This doesn't mean ignorance is strength, but balance is. Setting boundaries doesn't make you careless. It makes you sane. A short daily update. A trusted source. Time to digest. Time to not know for a little while. Because awareness should deepen your compassion, not hijack your peace. And sometimes, turning off the noise is the most honest form of self-preservation. Imagine being the one who always knows how to lighten the mood, the one with the quick comeback, the perfectly timed laugh, the ability to shift tension into amusement. People admire it. They rely on it. They call you strong, easygoing, fun. And somewhere along the way, you started relying on it too, not just to connect, but to cover. Because humor, when used as armor, is subtle. It doesn't scream for help. It slips in between the ache and the audience, smoothing the edges so no one has to look too closely, including you. You tell a story that hurts, but you twist the ending. You make your loneliness sound charming. You turn fear into irony, grief into sarcasm. You keep people laughing just long enough to avoid the silence where truth might surface. And the danger isn't that others don't see your pain. It's that you stop seeing it. You start believing the mask. You confuse deflection with resilience. You feel hollow, but can't name why. Because when you joke through everything, even to yourself, there's nowhere left for real emotion to land. It bounces off the surface, unacknowledged, unresolved. Humor can be healing when it's honest. When it holds space with the pain, not instead of it. But when it becomes your only response, it steals your right to be seen. It keeps your story palatable, polished, incomplete. You don't have to give it up. You don't have to become somber or stoic. But you do deserve a space where you don't have to be funny to be heard, where your sadness doesn't need a punchline, where someone, maybe just you, can sit beside the pain without trying to make it entertaining. Because you are not only the light you bring to others, you are also the weight you carry quietly, and both deserve to be held. You replay the moment, the way you said it, the way they looked at you, the silence after your message. You wonder if you were too much or not enough, if they misunderstood you, judged you, laughed about you after you left. You construct entire conversations in your mind, versions of what they might have thought, and you treat those imagined thoughts as real. It's exhausting, quietly, relentlessly exhausting. You adjust your words before speaking. Edit yourself in real time. You avoid risks not because you don't want them, but because you're already bracing for judgment that hasn't happened. You live in a hall of mirrors, seeing yourself through everyone else's imagined eyes, never your own, and each reflection feels like a verdict. But here's the quiet truth. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you believe. They're caught in their own loops of overthinking, their own doubts, their own mirrors. And even when they do judge, that moment is fleeting, temporary, not a definition, just a passing thought in the noise of their day. Meanwhile, your own life waits. The choices you didn't make, the words you didn't say, the joy you didn't let yourself feel, all delayed by a story you wrote in someone else's voice. It's human to care, to want to be seen kindly. But when imagined judgment becomes your compass, you lose your direction. You shrink yourself based on shadows. So gently, ask yourself, what if I stopped guessing what they think and started noticing what I feel? Because you can't live fully and hide constantly. And the longer you trade your presence for their imagined approval, the more of your life quietly slips by, unfelt, unclaimed, unlived. Imagine yourself holding a dream so softly you barely let yourself speak it. A quiet wish, a goal you revisit in your mind but keep hidden in life. You fear it will sound foolish, that others will laugh, dismiss it, ask too many questions, so you tuck it away. Not because it isn't real, but because protecting it feels safer than exposing it to doubt. In the journals of 19th century poets and painters, there are sketches and verses never shown to anyone, tucked in margins, scrawled between ledgers. The dreams were there, vivid, burning, but sealed behind silence. Some feared failure, others feared being seen too clearly. But over time, what they hid didn't grow stronger. It grew distant, unfed by air or light. You may believe that silence preserves something fragile, that if you don't say it out loud, it can't be criticized. But unspoken dreams rot slowly, not with a bang, but with forgetting. You rewrite them in smaller terms. You downgrade your hopes so they'll feel more reasonable, more acceptable, more invisible. And eventually, you stop visiting them at all. Dreams need oxygen, not applause, just space to breathe. A voice, a sketch, a plan. Even saying it once to yourself without flinching can be a beginning. You don't need to declare it to the world, but locking it away ensures it never begins. So imagine yourself whispering it, not to impress, not to prove, just to exist. Dreams aren't fragile because they're soft. They're fragile because we treat them like secrets. You open the cupboard without thinking. You're not hungry, just restless. The day felt heavy, or maybe too quiet. Maybe nothing's wrong, but something's missing. So you reach for a snack, a small comfort, a brief sweetness, a feeling, not because the body asked, but because the mind needed something soft to hold. Mindless eating rarely begins with appetite. It begins with emotion. A pause in the day, a wave of boredom, a sharp edge of loneliness. Food becomes a language, one that doesn't require words, something crunchy for anger, something creamy for stress, something warm to feel less alone. In many cultures, eating was once deeply mindful. Meals were shared slowly, with rituals that marked beginnings and endings. Even simple snacks had a place, a time, a rhythm. But now, eating often happens between things. While scrolling, while rushing, while thinking of everything except the act itself. The body learns this pattern. It associates flavor with comfort, not nourishment. Fullness becomes blurry. Not about being satisfied, but being distracted. Over time, your relationship with food shifts from connection to coping. And what you call a craving is sometimes just an emotion in disguise. Psychologically, this is known as emotional eating, a self-soothing loop that bypasses reflection. The food is real. The feeling beneath it stays untouched, and so the cycle repeats. But imagine this: a pause before the bite, a moment to ask, not what do I want to eat, but what am I feeling? What am I avoiding? What part of me needs attention that food can't give? You can still enjoy what you eat, but when eating becomes the answer to every question, the body stops being heard, and the self underneath stays hungry, not for food, but for presence, for care, for noticing. Imagine walking past a mirror and instinctively looking away, not out of vanity, but discomfort. You catch a glimpse, but it feels like someone else, a stranger wearing your shape. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that it's just a reflection. But deep down, a quieter truth stirs. You don't want to look too closely. Avoiding mirrors is more than a physical act. It's a refusal to witness yourself, a discomfort with presence, a quiet flinch from being seen, even by you. This habit often forms slowly, maybe after a period of burnout, maybe after a stretch of living on autopilot. Days blend, emotions get buried, choices feel reactive, and without realizing it, you stop checking in, not just with your appearance, but with your existence. Who you are, how you feel, where you are in the story of your own life. In many traditions, the mirror wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol. Ancient myths spoke of mirrors as gateways to truth. Reflection was sacred, introspective. It wasn't about judging the surface. It was about recognizing the self, making eye contact not with features, but with being. But in a life filled with noise, distraction, and relentless forward motion, we start dodging stillness. And mirrors become uncomfortable reminders of how far we've drifted from ourselves. You avoid your own eyes, not because there's something wrong with you, but because deep down, you're afraid you won't recognize what's there. Avoiding reflection doesn't protect you. It only delays the encounter. The cost is slow disconnection. You feel numb, restless, uncertain, and don't know why. You start to exist only in tasks, not in presence, but presence is recoverable. You don't need to stare into mirrors for hours, just a few seconds, a quiet breath, a moment of saying, "I'm still here," because the self you've been avoiding isn't gone. It's just waiting to be acknowledged again. Imagine standing in a quiet room with nothing pulling at you. No phone, no conversation, no background noise, just space, just stillness. And almost instantly, there's a reflex, the urge to fill it, to check something, scroll something, do something. Anything but sit with the silence, because boredom in this age feels like a flaw, an error in the system, a gap that must be closed. But boredom was never the enemy. It was once the invitation, a threshold into deeper thought, unnoticed emotions, forgotten memories. When you were bored, your mind used to wander, not outward, but inward. It replayed moments, imagined futures, made connections between things that didn't seem connected. In the quiet, your inner world came alive. Now, we flood every gap, the waiting room, the grocery line, the pause between tasks, the few seconds before sleep. Our attention is constantly preoccupied, split between screens, notifications, and obligations. And we tell ourselves we're productive, entertained, informed. But in truth, we're often just distracted from the very process that helps us make sense of who we are. The brain needs silence. It needs boredom, not for the sake of doing nothing, but for the making of meaning. Without it, thoughts stay shallow, emotions stay blurred, ideas arrive half-formed and disappear before we know what they were trying to say. When you never allow yourself to be bored, you never fully arrive in your own life. You float, you react, you consume, but you rarely digest. And maybe that's why, despite doing so much, you still feel unsettled. Because reflection doesn't shout, it waits in the quiet. Insight doesn't chase, it emerges when there's room. You don't need to be endlessly stimulated to matter. Sometimes, the most important things rise only in stillness. Let them. Let yourself be bored, not as absence, but as opening, not as lack, but as invitation. You don't ease into sleep, you fall into it. After hours of screen glow and mental noise, you finally give in, not out of peace, but exhaustion. The phone slips from your hand. The room stays lit longer than it should. You drift off, not with closure, but with residue. Unfinished thoughts, open loops, overstimulated nerves still humming beneath your skin. There's no pause, no quiet marking of the day's end, just a slow unraveling until your body shuts down without consent from your mind. And while sleep may come, rest rarely does. Once, sleep was sacred. A soft descent marked by rituals, warm tea, dim lights, silence, a fire fading, a book closing, a window open to the hush of night. These weren't just habits, they were signals, gentle messages to the nervous system that it was safe to let go, that the world could wait until morning. But now, days bleed into nights with no threshold between. Work lingers into bed, conversations echo. You go from decision-making to dreaming with no transition, no ceremony. And without that boundary, your sleep becomes survival, mechanical, incomplete. The body needs rhythm. The mind needs permission. Even the soul, in its quiet way, needs to know that the day has ended and that you've returned to yourself. Imagine treating sleep not as collapse, but as arrival. A return to stillness. A final, gentle act of care. Because how you leave the day shapes how you enter the next, and you deserve more than shutdown. You deserve a closing that honors the simple truth. You made it through today. Let that be enough. Let the night begin. Imagine yourself moving through the day, one notification at a time. A message buzzes, a task appears, a comment stings. You respond quickly, instinctively, without pause, not because it matters deeply, but because it showed up. Your attention is pulled like thread, always taut, never still. You're busy, but not directed, present, but not anchored. Reaction becomes your only rhythm. In the dusty records of early telegraph operators, historians found evidence of the first communication overload. Messages arrived faster than they could process. Operators developed calluses, eye strain, exhaustion, not from effort, but from the endless urgency of response. They weren't shaping the message, they were trapped inside it. And many of them, in private notes, confessed they no longer remembered what silence felt like. Today, the tools have changed, but the rhythm remains. You wake to red dots and blinking screens. You respond to emails before forming your own thoughts. You manage crises that aren't yours, adjust plans for other people's delays, absorb emotions that aren't your own. And all the while, your own direction fades. You become reactive, available, responsive, adaptive, but rarely intentional. You may believe this makes you efficient, needed, connected. But reaction is not the same as purpose. Reflex is not the same as vision. When everything feels urgent, nothing feels clear. Your day is filled, yet feels strangely hollow. So imagine yourself pausing, before the reply, before the scroll, before the mood decides for you. Even 5 quiet minutes can reclaim a day. Intention doesn't require control, just the courage to begin before the world tells you who to be. You keep yourself busy. Plans, screens, small talk, tasks that feel important, days that feel full. But beneath it all, there's a quiet list of questions you never touch, not because they're unimportant, but because they're too real. What do I actually want? Am I living the right life? What if I'm wrong about everything? These aren't questions you ask out loud. They live in the background, felt more than spoken. In the moments you can't sleep, in the silence after a conversation ends, in the mirror, when your reflection looks unfamiliar. You tell yourself it's not the right time, you'll figure it out later. But later keeps moving. Throughout history, the deepest transformations came not from answers, but from questions. Socrates wandered Athens asking people what they believed and why. Buddhist monks sat for hours with koans, riddles not meant to be solved, but lived. Yet in modern life, we crave resolution, certainty, quick fixes. Questions without tidy endings feel dangerous, so we avoid them. Psychologically, this is a form of protective avoidance. The brain shields you from existential discomfort, because asking what you really want might mean changing everything, because facing what you fear might expose how long you've been pretending not to feel it. And change, true, lasting change, rarely begins in comfort. But growth waits behind the difficult questions. Not the ones others ask you, but the ones you whisper to yourself, then rush to ignore. What if I'm not who I thought I was? What if I am, and that's enough? Imagine sitting with just one question, not to answer it, not yet, but to hold it, to let it echo. Because sometimes the most important steps begin not with movement, but with the courage to wonder where you truly stand. Imagine opening your calendar and seeing every hour claimed. Meetings, calls, errands, plans. The white space is gone. Even rest becomes something you have to schedule. You feel productive, important, necessary. But beneath the structure is something harder to name, a fear of stillness. A full calendar can feel like purpose, like proof that you're moving, wanted, valid. But not all motion is meaning. And sometimes the schedule isn't a reflection of ambition, but an armor against the quiet. When you're always busy, you rarely ask, what am I avoiding? For many, that answer is discomfort, the awkward pause between tasks, the moments when questions surface about direction, about identity, about unmet needs. So you stay in motion, you say yes, you book the next thing. Not out of joy, but out of reflex. Historically, Rest and slowness were embedded into daily life. Meals lasted longer. Work had seasons. Evenings held space. But in modern culture, constant engagement is celebrated. Idleness is framed as laziness. The more you do, the more you're worth. At least, that's the illusion. But the cost is depth. You begin to live horizontally, wide, but not deep. Relationships skim the surface. Self-awareness fades. You become efficient, but not present. The rhythm of your life is dictated not by what matters, but by what fits. A calendar can be a tool, a map, a container for intention. But when it becomes a shield, layered with tasks to protect you from your own interior world, you lose something quiet but essential, the chance to simply be. You don't need to cancel everything. Just notice. Notice what you say yes to out of fear, what you schedule to avoid silence, and what might rise in the space you've been too busy to allow. Because fullness is not the same as meaning. And sometimes, the most honest answer is, nothing is planned. And that's okay. Imagine planning your week down to the hour, deadlines, meetings, errands, habits, every block accounted for, every task justified. You move from one obligation to the next with practiced efficiency. But nowhere on that list is rest. Not real rest. Not time that asks nothing of you. At best, it's penciled in as a reward. If you finish everything, if you stay ahead, if you earn it. And so, rest becomes conditional. A luxury. Something you allow yourself only when the work is done, which it never really is. There's always more to do, more to fix, more to prove. You don't skip rest on purpose. You just keep pushing it to the margins. Until the weekend, until the next break, until burnout finally demands what you wouldn't freely give. But rest isn't a prize. It's not a sign of weakness, or laziness, or falling behind. It's a biological need, a psychological anchor, a sacred kind of maintenance that keeps your humanity intact. When you delay it, everything else you're building, your relationships, your creativity, your clarity, starts to fray. You run on empty and call it strength. You confuse endurance with health. Skipping rest doesn't just exhaust the body, it erodes your ability to feel, to process, to reflect. Without pauses, life becomes a blur of achievement without absorption. You forget why you started. You forget what it means to simply be, not as a role, not as a function, but as a person. The truth is, rest doesn't need to be earned. It needs to be respected, protected, practiced, not just when everything's done, but especially when you're in the middle of everything. Rest isn't what you get after you matter. It's what reminds you that you already do. So stop treating your body like a machine with no off switch. Plan for rest like you plan for effort. Let it be intentional. Let it be non-negotiable. Let it be human. You keep pushing. You answer late-night emails, stretch yourself thin, say yes when your body whispers no. You run on caffeine, obligation, and the quiet pride of being needed. There's a strange satisfaction in the tiredness, like proof that you're doing enough, being enough, becoming enough. And slowly, you begin to wear your exhaustion like a medal. Burnout starts this way, not as collapse, but as sacrifice dressed up as purpose. You tell yourself that rest is a luxury, that slowing down is weakness, that the hustle is noble. You confuse depletion with dedication. You confuse being stretched with being significant. But the cost is quiet at first. Joy becomes effort. Focus frays. The things you once loved feel heavy. And the spark that once fueled you, creativity, compassion, curiosity, starts to dim. You don't notice right away, because the world still applauds your output. But inside, you flicker. Historically, societies revered those who worked with devotion. But devotion was never meant to erase the self. Even ancient farmers followed the rhythm of seasons, laboring, yes, but also resting when the land needed to recover. You are not exempt from those natural laws. Burnout isn't proof of your worth. It's a warning, a call to return, to boundaries, to breath, to balance. Because a soul that's always burning doesn't illuminate, it withers, it shrinks, and eventually, it disappears beneath the weight of its own unacknowledged need. You don't need to earn rest. You need to remember that a steady glow lasts longer than a desperate flame. Let yourself be human. Let yourself stop. The light you're chasing might already be inside you, but only if you give it space to shine. Imagine yourself standing at a quiet crossroads, not dramatic, not urgent, just unclear. You tell yourself there's no rush, that more time will help, that clarity will come when it's ready. So you wait, you float, you let the days pass in between decisions. But time moves, even when you don't, and eventually, what felt like patience becomes a kind of drift. In medieval Europe, some monks practiced non scellere, the avoidance of sin by avoiding action. They believed if they did nothing, they couldn't do wrong. But over time, these same orders found that passivity brought its own decay. Gardens untended, books unread, prayers repeated without heart. It wasn't evil that unraveled them, it was indecision, a slow erosion, masked as safety. You may believe that waiting is wise, that avoiding choice keeps options open. But clarity doesn't arrive by accident. It's summoned by effort, by reflection, by choosing even when you're unsure. The longer you avoid deciding, the heavier the fog becomes. And soon, standing still begins to feel like moving backwards. Indecision is not neutral. It has direction. It leads to repetition, to sameness, to the quiet regret of never really knowing what might have happened if you had simply chosen. So, imagine yourself picking, not the perfect path, but a real one. Not because you're certain, but because clarity isn't found in waiting, it's found in walking. One uncertain step at a time. You're asked a question. There's a pause, a flicker of something forming, and then you say it. I don't know. It feels safe, honest even. A way to stay neutral, to avoid choosing wrong, to keep expectations low. But over time, that safety becomes a shield, and behind it, something begins to shrink. There's a difference between not knowing and not deciding. One invites curiosity, the other avoids commitment. You tell yourself you're being careful, thoughtful. But sometimes, the truth is simpler. You're afraid to be wrong, to be seen, to be responsible for the direction your voice might take. In ancient rhetoric, hesitation had a purpose. Socratic dialogue was built on not knowing, but only as a path to deeper insight. I don't know was never meant to be an endpoint. It was an opening. Today, it often becomes a stall, a soft refusal to look inward, to choose, to risk. Psychologists call this a form of learned helplessness. When I don't know becomes habitual, the brain starts bypassing effort altogether. You disengage before even trying. The world feels foggy, not because it is, but because you've trained your mind not to look too closely. But imagine if you paused and let the question sit, gave yourself permission to guess, to try, to be unsure without disappearing. Even a partial truth spoken with care holds more power than a reflexive retreat. You won't always know. That's human. But when I don't know becomes the default, you rob yourself of agency. Your voice stalls, not because it's quiet, but because it's afraid of echo. And slowly, your life begins to follow that same hesitation. Step back, stay small, say less. But you can choose to wonder, to speak, to try, even when you're unsure. Because clarity doesn't wait at the finish line. It builds with every honest attempt to meet the unknown. Imagine sitting with someone you care about. The conversation pauses just for a moment. You feel a shift, a tension, and before the quiet can settle, you fill it. A comment about the weather, a question you don't really care about, anything to cover the stillness, to keep the air moving. You don't mean to run from the silence, but part of you is afraid of what it might reveal. In many cultures, we're taught that silence equals awkwardness, that a good connection is constant talking, that comfort means no pauses. But in truth, the deepest bonds often grow in the spaces between words, a shared glance, a long exhale, A still moment where nothing needs to be said and everything is still understood. When you always fill the silence, you crowd the room with noise, not necessarily loud, but constant, filler stories, half-formed thoughts, deflections, not because you're insincere, but because silence feels too naked, too revealing, too vulnerable. But what if that vulnerability is the very thing that allows real closeness? Historically, quiet wasn't always uncomfortable. In old traditions, shared silence was a mark of trust. Companions could sit together in stillness without needing to perform. In monastic communities, silence was sacred, an acknowledgement that words can only carry so much. In some indigenous cultures, pauses in conversation are respectful, even essential, honoring thought and presence over speed. Today, in a world of instant replies and constant output, we've grown allergic to that stillness. We rush to fill it, fearing judgment, fearing boredom, fearing what feelings might surface if we simply stopped. But when you allow space, something subtle happens. Defenses lower, listening deepens. The presence becomes richer. Silence isn't emptiness, it's invitation. And maybe the question isn't what should I say next, but can I stay here with them in this quiet just a little longer? Imagine starting your day with a glance at your inbox, before sunlight, before a moment of quiet, before even asking yourself what you actually want or need. The world floods in through subject lines and requests, pulling your attention outward. You answer, you respond, you solve. Each reply feels necessary, each notification a call to action. And before you realize it, hours have passed. The day's rhythm is set, not by your priorities, but by what others decided to send your way. Letting emails rule your day is rarely a conscious choice. It's the path of least resistance. You feel productive, plugged in, indispensable. But underneath the momentum, something gets quietly displaced. Your own focus, your own direction, your own sense of what matters most. You enter a loop of reactivity, always catching up, never quite getting ahead. Living in response mode feels useful in the moment, but creation, the work that builds, the thoughts that deepen, the ideas that move you forward, requires space and intention. It asks you to turn inward before you turn outward, to start not with what's demanded, but with what's meaningful. Without that pause, your attention scatters. Your best energy is spent on things that don't belong to you. By noon, you're depleted, yet strangely unsatisfied. You don't have to abandon your inbox, but you can decide when it gets your attention. Carve out the first moments of the day for you, your thoughts, your projects, your own unfolding. Let your mind be a place of origin, not just a clearinghouse for requests, because if every day begins in response, you risk never returning to creation. And a life lived always answering the world leaves little room to listen for what's quietly waiting inside you, asking to be made real. You feel the phantom buzz, even when the phone is silent. An urge, a flicker, a quick reach for the device. You check, just in case. A new message? A reply? A breaking headline? Most of the time, it's nothing urgent. A status update, an ad, a distant echo in a digital hallway. But still, you refresh, you scan, you let each alert dictate the rhythm of your mind. Notifications promise connection, but what they deliver is fragmentation. Every buzz, every ping, is an invitation to leave the moment you're in. Your attention fractures. The world around you blurs. Conversation thins. Thought scatters. Even pleasure is interrupted by the itch to check. Just once more. This wasn't always the pattern. Once, presence was undivided. Letters waited in their envelopes. Calls rang out through the house, and if you missed one, life simply went on. There was space between messages. There was space between moments. Now, urgency is manufactured. Everything feels immediate, even when it isn't important. You lose the thread of your own thoughts. You begin to measure your day by what others demand from you, not by what you need or value. Rest is broken by the flicker of a screen. Focus is lost to the anxiety of missing something. not realizing what you're really missing is now. Imagine what could return if you allowed presence to stretch uninterrupted, if you let the world wait, even for a minute, and reclaimed your own rhythm. Because life isn't lived in notifications. It's lived in the quiet space between them, where your attention, your focus, your real experience still waits to be found. Imagine yourself receiving a compliment, a quiet thank you, a kind observation, a simple recognition. Instinctively, you deflect. You laugh it off. You shift the focus, lower your gaze, make a joke. You tell yourself it's modesty, that you don't want attention. But beneath the gesture is discomfort, a suspicion of joy, a habit of hiding, a belief that being seen is somehow unsafe. In letters from Renaissance artists, even the masters, those who changed the course of history with paint and stone, often dismissed praise. In their journals, gratitude was fleeting, always followed by critique or self-doubt. "It is not so fine as you think," one wrote after completing a fresco that would outlive him. Praise felt dangerous, almost dishonest, as if accepting it would invite ruin or disappointment. You may recognize this in yourself. Each time you wave off a kind word, you reinforce the idea that joy is something to be managed, not felt. That acknowledgement is a risk. You begin to teach your mind to distrust celebration, to expect judgment lurking behind admiration. Slowly, you become allergic to being seen for who you are, talented, kind, worthy. You build a shell against the warmth, never letting it land. But refusing praise doesn't protect you from arrogance, it protects you from connection. Joy shrinks, suspicion grows, and the world's generosity seems less real. Compliments aren't traps, they're gifts. Accepting them is not arrogance, it's participation in the gentle exchange of trust. So imagine yourself, next time, simply saying thank you. Let the light in, even for a moment. Being seen is not a danger, it's part of being human. You wake up and move through the day, but nothing feels fixed. There's no ritual to greet the morning, no pause to mark the evening. Tasks appear, disappear, rearrange themselves at the whim of others. Meals are eaten when convenient. Sleep comes when exhaustion wins. Without knowing it, you've let go of every anchor, every quiet tether that once made the world feel steady. Without anchors, days blur together. The mind grows restless, searching for shape, for meaning. You drift from message to message, from task to task, reacting instead of choosing. Priorities dissolve. The voices and urgencies of others fill the silence, and soon your own voice grows faint. You are moving, but not by your own design. Throughout history, anchors were sacred. Monks rang bells for prayer. Sailors watched stars to navigate. Even in ordinary homes, morning routines and evening rituals stitched the hours together. These small acts weren't just tradition, they were orientation. A way to remember who you are in the midst of everything you are not. Psychologically, rituals and priorities act as boundaries for the mind. They signal what matters, what endures, what can wait. Without them, you become porous, absorbing everyone else's momentum, losing track of your own. The result is a subtle kind of vertigo, seasickness of the soul, a drifting unease that's hard to name. Imagine, instead, building small anchors into your day, lighting a candle before bed, a walk after lunch, a moment of stillness before checking your phone. Tiny pauses that say, "I am here. This is my life. I choose this rhythm." Anchors don't have to be grand. They just have to hold you, to give you a place to return, a pattern to rely on, a moment to listen for your own current beneath the noise. Imagine scrolling through a social feed, faces smiling with success, achievements, milestones. Every post feels like a finish line you never crossed, a destination you never reached. And in that moment, the weight settles in. I'm behind. I'm late. Everyone else is ahead. This feeling is more than discouragement. It's a distortion of time itself. Comparison warps your sense of progress, creating a phantom race where the finish line keeps moving farther away. You're not running toward a goal. you're chasing shadows. This isn't new. Humans have always measured themselves against others. Ancient storytellers spoke of the grass greener, and philosophers warned against envy. But in the digital age, comparison is constant. Real and imagined lives scroll past in endless streams, creating an echo chamber of achievement, and the effect is exhausting. You rush, you hustle, you pile up to-dos, trying to catch up to a version of life that exists mostly in snapshots and highlight reels. Meanwhile, your own path, the one with its twists, pauses, and quiet victories, gets lost in the noise. The irony is that this race has no finish. There's no official winner, because the measure is external, shifting, and incomplete. You don't need to outrun others. You only need to keep pace with your own becoming. Historically, many cultures honored personal timing. Seasons arrived in their own order. Growth was patient, and the journey was sacred. Today, the pressure to accelerate often drowns out these rhythms. So when you feel behind, remember, you're not in a race against others. You're on your own journey. And sometimes, the bravest step is to slow down, to see where you really are, right now. Imagine something matters to you, a job, a friendship, a hope you quietly held, and then it slips away, or never quite becomes what you wanted. The sting of disappointment creeps in, heavy and unwelcome. Instead of feeling it, you shrug. You say, "I don't care." You repeat it until it sounds true. It's easier than admitting you're hurt. Indifference becomes a shield, one you wear with practiced ease. But numbness is not strength. It's a survival tactic, a way to keep pain at arm's length. When you make apathy your armor, you don't just protect yourself from loss or rejection. You block out all the things that might have brought joy, meaning, or surprise. The world shrinks. Your inner landscape grows quieter, less colorful. Disappointment fades, but so does excitement. Fear dulls, but so does hope. Over time, saying, "I don't care," becomes a reflex. You stop reaching. You stop risking. You mistake detachment for wisdom, as if the safest way to live is not to feel at all. But beneath the numbness, your heart still wants what it wants. Longing doesn't disappear. It just goes underground, surfacing as restlessness, or irritability, or fatigue that won't lift. Apathy is not the absence of care. It's the cost of avoiding it. True resilience is the ability to feel pain and still keep going. To admit softly, "This mattered to me." To let disappointment move through you without letting it define you, because only by honoring what you hoped for can you find the courage to hope again. Only by feeling what hurts can you remember what's worth wanting. And only by dropping the armor do you give yourself a chance, not just to survive disappointment, but to be alive for all that comes next. You jot it down, a line, an image, a burst of possibility, another page, another file, another app filled with fragments of ideas. Some are sharp as lightning, others are hazy, just a word or two, waiting for clarity that never comes. Over time, the collection grows. Dozens of notebooks, endless lists, scattered voice memos. You become a curator of what could be. It feels productive, hopeful even. The next great project, the reinvention, the leap, all of it captured before it disappears. But as the pile grows, a quiet truth emerges. Very little ever leaves the page. Your notebooks become sanctuaries for ideas, not launching pads. Inspiration lingers, unused, until it loses its urgency and becomes background noise, comforting but stagnant. This isn't laziness. It's a gentle form of self-preservation. To keep ideas in the realm of someday is to protect them from risk, from imperfection, from the vulnerability of trying. You can believe in your potential because you never have to test it. The notebooks remain immaculate, untouched by the messiness of action. Throughout history, the line between dreamers and doers has always been thin. The difference isn't brilliance, it's bravery. The willingness to start, to stumble, to let an idea grow imperfectly in the world. Transformation requires sacrifice. The comfort of potential must yield to the awkwardness of practice. So ask yourself, gently, What would happen if you chose one idea and moved it into the light, even if it falters, even if it's messy? Because an unused idea is a beautiful ornament, but an acted-on idea, no matter how flawed, becomes a piece of your living, breathing self. Imagine yourself always stepping aside. You offer the last slice, answer the late call, rearrange your day so others won't be disappointed. Selflessness feels noble, a quiet sacrifice, a kindness woven into your routines. You become easy to lean on, gentle to the point of disappearance. But beneath the surface, a subtle fatigue takes root. Your needs don't vanish. They just wait, unaddressed, quietly stacking up. In 19th century letters from caregivers and nurses, there are lines laced with pride and exhaustion. "I am useful," one writes, "and so I must remain invisible." Their days fill with tending to others, their own aches tucked away. At first, the world thanks them, but over years, unspoken weariness breeds resentment, a sharpness that slips into words or silences, surprising even themselves. They gave everything, but something was lost. You may feel virtuous for putting yourself last, but martyrdom, when practiced too long, becomes a subtle poison. The boundaries dissolve. The kindness you offered turns brittle. You start to wonder why no one sees your effort, why the world doesn't rush to refill what you've poured out. Resentment grows where needs go ignored, and the version of you that remains, a shadow, a helper, a silent sufferer, is not the one anyone truly wants or needs. So imagine yourself stepping forward, just once, meeting your own needs, not as selfishness, but as balance. The world benefits from your care, but it also needs your wholeness. Giving from fullness, not emptiness, is the only kindness that lasts. You start your day with a checklist, steps counted, minutes logged, calories tracked. You turn routines into streaks and habits into numbers. At first, it feels empowering, a sense of control, a way to measure progress. Each task completed, each point earned, sparks a small reward. But slowly, the scorecard becomes the script. Ordinary moments shrink into data. You begin to see everything through the lens of achievement. A walk isn't a walk, it's a step count. Rest isn't rest, it's recovery. Even joy is quantified. How many days in a row did you meditate? How much did you improve? The gentle rhythm of living is replaced by the churn of optimization. Historically, play and ritual brought meaning for their own sake. Children built sandcastles to feel the shape of their imagination, not to break records. Ancient celebrations had no leaderboards, only shared laughter and presence. But now, gamification seeps into every corner of daily life. Apps nudge you, notifications ping, progress bars urge you onward, always onward. The mind adapts. It starts craving feedback, rewards, visible proof of worth. Yet with each new metric, something soft is lost. Spontaneity dulls, curiosity narrows. Life becomes a project to manage rather than an experience to inhabit. The invisible cost is subtle, a creeping sense of emptiness, even when you're winning. Imagine instead a day measured not in points but in presence, where some moments are allowed to pass unrecorded, where you walk because you want to feel the ground beneath your feet, not because you must. Where joy is its own reason, not a line on a chart. You don't need to abandon every tool. But remember, life's worth isn't found on a scoreboard. The richest days can't be optimized. They can only be lived. Imagine yourself stepping into a conversation where someone's struggles take center stage. You listen. You offer advice. You help carry their burdens. It feels purposeful, even noble. You are needed. You are valuable. But beneath this act of care, there's a quieter story, one where your own wounds remain untouched, gathering dust in the shadows. Always fixing others can be a form of avoidance. It's easier to pour energy outward than to face the tangled knots inside. When you focus on someone else's pain, you redirect attention. You become a healer, a rescuer, a guide. But in doing so, you often silence the parts of yourself that need healing the most. This dynamic isn't selfishness, it's a survival strategy. Because opening up your own vulnerability feels risky. It means naming discomfort, disappointment, or fear. It means sitting with parts of yourself you've learned to ignore. Throughout history, caregivers and helpers have been revered. In many societies, tending to others is sacred work. But when the care becomes compulsive, it transforms. Compassion turns into distraction. Empathy becomes a shield. The cost is gradual, but real. Over time, the more you fix others, the less you connect with your own emotions. Your sense of self can blur. Your boundaries can weaken. And your wounds remain silent, waiting for acknowledgement. Healing isn't a one-way street. It requires turning inward as much as reaching outward. It means allowing yourself to be seen, not just as a helper, but as a human with needs, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And true compassion begins with healing yourself. Imagine moving through your day with your breath caught just beneath your collarbones, shallow, hurried, barely noticed. Each inhale is brief, each exhale unfinished. You're not running or bracing for impact, but your body doesn't know the difference. You live in a subtle, permanent flinch, as if something unseen is always about to happen. This becomes your normal, a life lived on the edge of full presence, but never quite arriving. Most days, you don't notice it. The mind is busy, the world is loud, and there's always another thing to do. Breathing deeply seems unnecessary, almost indulgent, something you'll remember when there's time, when the work is done, when you finally relax. But relaxation never comes uninvited. Instead, you stay in a low-grade alert, your body tensed for a threat that isn't there, your nervous system never told it's safe. Shallow breathing keeps you small, keeps your energy locked in the upper chest, fueling anxiety and fatigue. It dulls sensation, blurs thought, and narrows the field of what you notice. You survive this way, but you rarely feel alive. And yet, the body is always waiting for a different cue, a deep, slow breath that signals, here, now. You are allowed to settle. You are allowed to expand. You are allowed to be fully present in this moment, not just skimming the surface of it. Even a single intentional breath can soften the muscles, steady the heart, and bring color back into the mind. Breathing deeply is not just a physical act. It's an invitation to pause, to receive, to let the body remember its own wholeness. It's a quiet practice of coming home to yourself over and over until aliveness feels natural again. You drift between what was and what might be. A memory surfaces, something you wish you'd said or done or never done at all. Then comes a flicker of worry about what's next, an unfinished task, a distant deadline, an imagined disaster. Your body is here, but your mind is elsewhere, rewinding, fast-forwarding, missing the subtle rhythm of now. The present moment waits quietly. Sunlight spills across your desk. A breeze stirs the curtain. Your heart beats, steady, unnoticed. But you're not really in it. You're somewhere else, cycling through stories only you can hear. The past feels heavy, the future feels urgent, and the present slips by, a soft, steady stream beneath your feet. This isn't failure. It's a survival instinct, honed over centuries. Anticipating danger, learning from mistakes. But when rumination becomes habit, you lose access to the only place where life can actually be lived, right here, right now. And in the absence of presence, joy becomes elusive. Growth stalls. Even pain, unaddressed, lingers in the shadows. Throughout time, philosophers and mystics have described the present as a kind of hidden power, a quiet force that transforms anxiety into calm, regret into acceptance. The moment you finally return to your breath, your senses, your body, you reclaim a small, profound freedom. You remember that, in this exact second, you are safe. You are alive. You are able to choose. The world isn't waiting in some distant future or hidden in the ashes of memory. It's unfolding, moment by moment, wherever you are. and each time you return to it, you gather yourself again, piece by piece, breath by breath. Imagine yourself brushing off a hurt, a friend's coldness, a promise quietly broken, a moment of dismissal. You shrug, say it's nothing, insist you're fine. You walk it off the way you might a stubbed toe, telling yourself that pain fades if you don't talk about it. But beneath the surface, something bruises. The ache settles in, quiet and persistent. In ancient Chinese poetry, there are verses about hidden wounds, a missed goodbye, a trust eroded, a feeling left unexplained. Poets wrote of walking through gardens, carrying pain as gently as fallen petals, never letting it show. Silence was the chosen balm, but the poems lingered because the pain remained. Naming it was forbidden, so it settled deeper, coloring everything with a quiet ache. You may do the same. You move past betrayals without complaint, thinking it's strength to stay silent. But pain doesn't dissolve just because it's unspoken. It lingers in your gestures, your tone, the walls you slowly build. Each time you minimize what hurt you, you teach yourself to expect less from others and from yourself. What begins as resilience often turns into distance, a subtle closing off from the world. You believe it's better not to dwell. That pain is temporary if ignored. But unspoken wounds collect, layer by layer, shaping the way you trust, connect, and hope. Healing begins not with forgetting, but with gentle acknowledgement. Allow yourself to notice what hurts, to name it, even quietly. The act of seeing your pain is the first step in letting it soften and, slowly, heal. You wake up and dive in. The checklist is long. There are steps to follow, tasks to finish, problems to solve. Your days fill with what's next and how do I get it done? The focus is on action, on progress, on visible results. But beneath the busyness, something quieter slips away, the bigger why that once pointed your way forward. Purpose isn't loud. It rarely shouts over deadlines or demands. But when you lose sight of it, life becomes repetition. You might work harder than ever, yet the work feels flat, the victories hollow. Each achievement leads only to the next, with no sense of what connects them all. Routine takes over. You do things because you always have, not because they matter. Throughout history, the search for why shaped civilizations. Philosophers gathered under open skies to ask what made life meaningful. Spiritual traditions framed daily acts within stories of belonging and becoming. Even the simplest rituals, a meal, a song, a shared moment, carried echoes of purpose, a reminder that life was more than a series of tasks. Psychologically, losing touch with your why can lead to burnout and apathy. The mind grows restless, searching for direction. Action loses meaning. Effort feels pointless. Without a compass, even the best habits become empty. Imagine pausing, even for a moment, to ask, why am I doing this? What deeper value am I serving? Whose story am I living? Sometimes the answer is small: love, curiosity, care. Sometimes it's unknown. But even the act of asking brings you closer to meaning. You don't have to solve the riddle every day, but remembering the why can transform the ordinary into the significant, a compass that keeps you true, no matter how routine the path may seem. Imagine the subtle tightness behind your eyes, the slight hesitation before a decision, the whisper of fatigue in your bones. These early signs often pass unnoticed, dismissed as minor or inconvenient. You push through, telling yourself it's nothing serious. After all, life demands action, not pause. But those quiet warnings are messages, soft signals from your body and mind, gently nudging you to slow down, to reconsider, to care. Ignoring them is like ignoring a flickering light on the dashboard. At first, it seems harmless, but over time, the small flicker can signal something deeper, something that, left unattended, turns into a breakdown. Historically, many traditions honored the wisdom of the body and mind. Shamans, healers, and elders taught people to listen to subtle signs, be it a change in breath, a feeling in the gut, or a shift in mood. These signals were guides, protecting the self from harm. Today, we often prize toughness and endurance over sensitivity. We dismiss hesitation as weakness, fatigue as laziness, tension as stress we must conquer. The result? What could have been a gentle course correction becomes a crisis, an emotional collapse, a physical breakdown, a moment when the noise becomes impossible to ignore. Hindsight sharpens the pain of ignoring early signs. We ask ourselves, how did I let it get this far? But the truth is, the warnings were there. We just didn't listen. Learning to honor early signs isn't surrender. It's wisdom. It's respect for your limits, for your rhythms, for your survival. Because prevention often looks quiet, but neglect becomes chaos. Imagine turning over a moment in your mind, an unresolved goodbye, a conversation that never finished, a question left hanging in the air. You want an answer. You want a reason. You want to close the door gently, to know exactly why it ended, to leave nothing unsaid. The ache for closure is real. It promises relief, certainty, a way to package the past so you can finally move forward. But life is rarely that tidy. Endings blur. Motives go unexplained. Some stories fizzle. Some relationships trail off into silence. Some chapters end without an epilogue. And yet, you keep looking for the missing piece, the explanation, the apology, the satisfying why. You replay scenes, draft unsent messages, hope for understanding that may never come. In seeking closure, you hope to reclaim your power over what happened. Yet the world is more ambiguous than we wish. Life doesn't owe us a perfect ending. The need for closure can become a kind of obsession, stalling your healing, holding you hostage to the past, keeping you from living the unfinished moments that are already here. Sometimes the answer you want isn't out there. Sometimes it doesn't exist at all. True peace comes not from forcing conclusions, but from accepting what can't be wrapped up, from letting questions remain open, from allowing feelings to rise and fall without being solved. It's a quiet act of courage to stop searching for the last word and start allowing the next breath. In a messy world, clarity is often a luxury, not a guarantee. Acceptance isn't defeat, it's an opening. It's the gentle art of living with loose ends and trusting that you can be whole even when the story isn't. Closure may never come, but healing always can. You respond right away. A message at midnight, a call during dinner, a ping just as you start to rest. You pride yourself on being dependable, never letting anyone down, never missing a moment. But the more available you make yourself, the less of yourself you actually bring. Conversations blur, commitments overlap. Your attention is divided, your energy spread thin across too many open lines. At first, it feels generous, a way to show care, to be needed, to stay included. But constant availability comes at a cost. Boundaries erode. The quiet spaces where your mind could wander, your heart could settle, are filled with other people's urgency. Your presence, real presence, diminishes with every interruption. You're there, but not truly. With them, but also elsewhere. You start to confuse responsiveness with connection. In the past, distance protected intimacy. Letters took days. Visits were events. Time apart was expected. Now, technology erases every gap, blurring the lines between work and home, solitude and socializing. You're always on, reachable, but rarely reached. This isn't a failure of kindness, but of balance. Connection without boundaries becomes obligation, an endless loop of reaction with no room for reflection. And without space to recharge, even the deepest relationships can lose their meaning, fading into background noise. Imagine granting yourself permission to step back, to answer slowly, to hold your own time sacred. Because true presence doesn't mean being always available. It means being fully here, in the moment you've chosen, with nothing left behind and nothing held back. That is how connection regains its meaning, and how you regain yourself. Imagine yourself meeting every shadow with a smile. No matter what aches beneath the surface, You answer, "I'm fine," or "It could be worse." You fill silence with bright words, smother worry with gratitude lists, paint hope over disappointment like a fresh coat. It feels like strength. It sounds like resilience. But after a while, constant sunshine becomes its own kind of drought. The soil beneath dries out. The roots wither. In the letters of soldiers from World War I, there are lines crowded with forced optimism, hoping for victory, promising their loved ones that spirits remain high, even as the truth was mud, exhaustion, fear. The bravest often wrote the brightest. They believed positivity would shield their families from pain. But behind the letters, the unsaid lingered. Trauma pooled in the quiet spaces between words, waiting for permission to be felt. Today, the pressure remains, to be grateful, to be upbeat, to find the silver lining before the storm has even passed. Darkness is denied, sadness deferred, until it turns heavy and silent inside you. Emotions unexpressed don't fade, they ferment. The effort to stay strong becomes its own weakness, leaving you brittle, unrooted, out of touch with what's real. You may believe that optimism is a duty, that acknowledging pain is defeat, but honesty, not denial, is what gives you true resilience. A garden cannot thrive on sunlight alone. It needs the coolness of shade, the nourishment of rain. So imagine yourself, just once, allowing the darkness to be named. Let discomfort pass through instead of hiding it. Strength is not in pretending, but in allowing your whole self, light and dark, to be seen and held. You begin to speak, a feeling, a boundary, a decision, and immediately you add a reason. Then another. You stack explanations, soften your voice, wrap your truth in disclaimers. You want to be understood, accepted, forgiven for taking up space. But underneath each justification is a quiet fear that your needs, on their own, are not enough. Over time, over-explaining becomes instinct. You replay conversations, editing what you said, wishing you'd made it clearer, easier, more palatable. The soul learns a strange lesson, that in order to belong, it must first make others comfortable, that your truth must arrive pre-approved, trimmed down, to fit someone else's comfort. This pattern has deep roots. In many cultures, especially for those who have learned to keep the peace, self-expression came with conditions. Children are taught not to be too much, not to ask for too often, not to disturb the balance. The habit of justification grows from wanting to avoid conflict, to not seem difficult, to ensure you're not misunderstood. But with every extra explanation, something is lost. The clarity of your truth becomes diluted. The self you share is only a shadow, filtered, conditioned, small. The original message, I need, I feel, I want, becomes tangled in apologies and footnotes. Imagine, instead, stating your truth plainly. No justification, no excessive detail. Just, I'm not available tonight. I need some space. I don't agree. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but each time you let your truth stand on its own, you teach yourself and others that your needs are valid without performance. You are allowed to take up space, to need, to feel, to want, without needing to explain yourself into invisibility. Let your words breathe, unburdened. Let your soul occupy its full dimensions. The world can adjust. Imagine standing in a crowded room, and suddenly a casual glance or a passing comment feels like a personal jab. You rewind the moment, dissecting tone and expression, searching for hidden meaning. Your heart tightens. You feel exposed. You tell yourself, they meant it that way. It's about me. Taking everything personally is like living under a rain of invisible arrows. Neutral moments, silences, neutral expressions, even kindness, are filtered through a lens of suspicion. Every shadow becomes a threat. Every neutral action feels charged with intention. This way of seeing the world doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from fragility, from past wounds that whisper, you are vulnerable. You must protect yourself. When your self-worth is fragile, you scan constantly for signs of rejection, criticism, or abandonment. You carry a hyper-alertness to emotional threat, even when none exists. Historically, survival often depended on reading social cues accurately. But in today's complex social environments, this hypervigilance can turn against you. It builds walls where bridges could be, and isolates you behind defenses that tire your spirit. The paradox is painful. By taking everything personally, you lose the freedom to engage openly. You drain your energy defending against imagined attacks. You miss moments of genuine connection because you're busy guarding your fragile self. Healing this habit begins with gentle awareness. When a moment feels like an attack, pause. Ask, is this about me, or am I seeing through a lens clouded by fear? Over time, this practice softens the armor, because not everything is about you, and sometimes the greatest freedom comes from letting go of shadows that never existed. Imagine a thought drifts quietly across your mind. They don't like me, or I'll never be good enough. It arrives unannounced, slipping into your inner dialogue with the ease of a fact. The body reacts, a little tension, a twist in your stomach, a flush of doubt. Before you know it, you're moving through your day as if this idea were as solid as gravity. You don't question it because it feels true. This is the silent power of assumption, when every mental whisper is granted the weight of reality. Thoughts, by nature, are not always accurate. They are echoes of fears, old wounds, other people's opinions, random brain static. Some arise from the calm of clarity, but many emerge from the fog of memory or the shadows of anxiety. Still, the mind is convincing. It sells every story with the same calm authority. You believe it, you act on it, you let it shape your choices. When you assume thoughts are facts, you stop noticing the gap between what you think and what actually is. You forget that the mind can lie, distort, dramatize. That trauma can leave fingerprints on perception. That fear can wear the mask of certainty. Unchecked, these mental scripts become self-fulfilling, limiting what you try, what you trust, who you let close. But you are not your thoughts. You are the one hearing them. You are allowed to ask, is this true? Is it helpful? Is it mine? You can let a thought pass without obeying it. You can sit with discomfort, noticing which stories arise from old wounds and which are rooted in this moment. Freedom begins with gentle skepticism, curiosity about your own mind, not to fight every thought, but to remember, not everything you think is true, and not every feeling is a fact. You can hold space for mental noise without letting it decide your reality. In that space, wisdom grows, quietly, patiently, beyond the noise. You look back and wince at what you said, how you acted, what you believed. With today's eyes, those moments seem naive, sometimes even shameful. You replay old mistakes, picking them apart, wishing you'd known then what you know now. It's easy to judge the person you once were, holding them to standards you've only reached through change itself. But this is the paradox of growth. You can only see the gaps because you've grown past them. The wisdom you have now was hard-won through trial, error, discomfort, and stumbling forward in the dark. No one is born with insight. No one moves in a straight line. Growth is awkward, uneven, sometimes invisible as it happens. Only in hindsight do you notice the subtle shifts, the values you reshaped, the fears you faced, the tenderness you gained. Every version of you tried their best with what they knew, what they'd lived, what they had the courage to attempt. Their mistakes were the tuition for your understanding. Their confusion was fertile ground for your clarity. And their pain was the raw material that softened you, taught you, changed you. History's wisest voices remind us, evolution is sacred. It's not something to resent, but to honor, to forgive yourself for who you were, and to thank yourself for having survived, learned, and moved forward. So when you feel the urge to judge your past, pause. See it not as a failure, but as evidence that you are, even now, still becoming. And that becoming, however tangled or imperfect, is the most human thing of all.